Hey everybody, welcome back to LSAT Wizard's COVID Relief, Logical Reasoning, and Reading Comprehension curriculum. If you have not already checked out our previous lessons, there are 3 other lessons out there that you probably should watch prior to this one. We cover a lot of content in this one that we've already discussed. The main format is going to stay the same, where I have an outline that hopefully you guys already have. You can find it on lsatwizard.com if you have not already. And on that outline, we will have different topics. There's a combination of the way I like to teach of concepts and specific question types. So when it comes to the test, the concepts are fundamentals that apply to logical reasoning and reading. I think some people don't always realize that when they watch my first 3 lessons, they're like, okay, but are we going to do actually like specific to reading? The stuff I'm talking about will be relatable directly to logical reasoning and reading. And hopefully you've watched some of those homework videos where we've been able to apply it to those specific questions, to reading comprehension, to logical reasoning questions. So again, if you haven't already checked all that out, I encourage you to do so. Now, before I proceed into lesson 4, I do need to thank our sponsor, Ave Maria School of Law. None of this would have been possible. This entire thing has been, had started with them looking to find ways to offer lower cost LSAT prep to as many people as possible. And at the start of the pandemic, I saw this as an opportunity to come together, and really I wanted to give back as well. So I gave my time, they gave their resources, and we were able to offer a lot of free material, some of which is not free, but low cost because of certain licensing restrictions and other restrictions. So if you are looking for even more content than this free stuff, go check out lsatwizard.com, go to video courses. We have a lot more there as well. So with that, I'm going to go into a share screen where I'm going to be showing you guys. I still have open the Google Drive I shared with everybody to be able to get into this. What we want to do, actually, I thought I had it ready, but it's actually right here. Lesson 4 examples, and we have lesson 4's outline. So lesson 4's outline, what we're actually going to be working off of today. And really, as I said, and you've seen in the other lessons, we're not going to be going off of this outline strictly. So if you actually don't even have it right now, that's okay. Just follow along. The concepts we're going to discuss today are going to be important regardless of whether you have or have not done the questions or have the outline, etc. I apologize. I'm just closing out of the chat. For those that aren't aware, watching this recording, we have hundreds of people that have tuned into these videos live. This is live right now. So I will be calling on some people that are live. Obviously, if you're watching this as a recording and have any questions, just shoot me a question. Again, you can find me on YouTube, Reddit, Facebook. LSATwizard.com has a way of contacting us. I've spoken to a lot of you just during the process of this recording over the last few weeks, months, etc. And I try to get back to everybody. So please do reach out with any questions, feedback, etc. I'm always appreciative for that. Now, one last thing, actually, I realized before we go on that I always like to bring up. People ask me, why is this like COVID relief? Besides the fact of recognizing the limited resources some people are really struggling with during these times of the pandemic, we also have a GoFundMe that we're raising money for Feeding America's COVID Relief Fund. If you haven't already found that, you can Google LSAT Wizard GoFundMe. You'll find it. It's on the lsatwizard.com website. We have raised over $10,000 already, which is really remarkable. So thank you to everybody who's already given. And I want to thank everybody in advance who will. I really have been blown away by all that feedback. So even though this is that last lesson that I'm recording of our core lessons, that's kind of why I wanted to take the second to thank everybody for that. But definitely don't let this be the end. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. So kind of getting into what we're going to get going with, I'm going to just show you guys the table of contents of ideas of what this outline lesson 4 in total, the full chapter 4 is going to cover, even if we don't cover every single portion of it today in this lesson. So we're going to have our logic concepts. Logic concepts underlie the entire test, logical reasoning and reading comprehension. Today, we're going to be focused on traps. We're going to be talking a lot about down between 2 answers. How do we decide? That seems to be one of the biggest issues people have, and it's one of the most common comments that I get. So we're really going to dive into that. In terms of question types, there are certain question types we have yet to cover. There's about 4 of them, and not about, there are 4 of them that we haven't covered. I'm going to gloss over them in the lesson during this core lesson, but I say gloss because what we're actually going to do is really break them down in the extra free lessons and extra homework that is assigned based on drilling those questions. So that's kind of been the theme we figured out. This whole course has come together pretty quickly, and so I'm kind of learning on the fly as I'm doing this. So the question types have been more valuable, I found, to be really afterwards in these really thorough videos where I can break each question down. Same thing with the reading comprehension. There's going to be some more exercises to do. We're going to be adding in some extra homework where there's going to be some extra explanations to that. We're not going to be breaking that down today. In terms of lesson 4, there is going to be homework specific to lesson 4. And so that's why I kind of separated that. We have lesson 4's homework on page 16, and on page 18, you'll find what to do after the course. Now, we are going to, as part of this core lesson, talk about that stuff. We're going to jump down to that. Obviously, at the end of the day, some of you may be in different time periods. Some of you may be struggling with different aspects of your prep. And so that's where I'm going to have some general suggestions. And then at the very end, we're also going to be taking some questions from the audience to see if there are some personal questions that I can answer that maybe you, the viewers, also may have as well. So with that, we're going to get into the logical concepts specifically of traps. But with that, I'm not, just like I did in core lesson 3, I'm not going to be going off of this outline. I actually have a Word document that's going to put you more to the test in a certain way so that I can kind of call on the audience and get some participation along the way. Now, before we actually do that, I'm going to pull up this Word document here. These examples are all on the outline. So these are all things that we've gone over or are going to be included in the outline. So don't worry about this Word document if you don't actually have it. Now, just had that note of like to myself. Okay, so the idea is I want to do a little bit of a quick review of our core concept from really lesson 1, 2, and 3, discussing that and kind of recapping some of those biggest issues because they are so important. And then we'll see how we can put it into action in reference of the trap issues. So first issue we discussed in logical reasoning and really with reading comprehension too, but it's the idea of what it means to use reasoning with the lens of logic. So reasoning is the process of using evidence to reach a conclusion. The two main formats for reasoning, the most common formats that you'll see throughout the LSAT on all the sections, including even games, one is what we call an argument. It's where the LSAT will use reasoning themselves, and you're going to have to judge their reasoning. This second is going to be where you get the information-based evidence and they ask you to draw your own conclusions, use your own reasoning skills to draw your own conclusions. And we call that drawing an inference. When they task you with drawing a conclusion, that is you making an inference. Now, when we get this test, it is a multiple choice test. So even when they ask you to draw an inference, it's still going to be 5 possible answer choices, and you have to judge the reasoning behind each of them. When we judge, this is all stuff from core lesson 1, I recognize that we're reviewing here. I want you to recognize we are reviewing here. When we judge reasoning, we have a level of judging reasoning using our instincts that is based on a scale of likelihoods. We kind of have this like needle in our brains that point to certain conclusions as we get certain evidence. I use the example that my phone rings, it says Melissa. I tell you my wife's name's Melissa. I pick up, I'm like, hello. Oh, hey, honey, I'm in lesson. See you later. Love you. Bye. And I asked you guys who's on the phone. And in that lesson, we had a lot of people going, well, it's your wife, Melissa. And in the real world, that's probably what you're thinking. That is because that evidence started pointing this needle in your brain towards the most probable conclusion, which was that it's my wife. Now, judging using likelihoods is something I've said I do not have to train you to do. What I have tried to train you throughout this course to do is to stop judging reasoning using likelihoods. We are judging reasoning using the scale of logic. That's where the word logic comes into play. The reality is the whole test is a logic-based test, not just logical reasoning, but reading comprehension and games. It's a logic-based test. You are asked to judge using logic. Now, what logic is asking the question that's actually up here. Is it valid? Yes or no. Now, what valid means is that the evidence 100% proves the conclusion. When the evidence 100% proves the conclusion, we call it valid. If it's any amount short of 100, we call it invalid. Now, when I say logic, what we noted that's very interesting is the only section on the LSAT that's actually truly logic-based is actually games. even in this section, logical reasoning, that has the word logic in it, they're telling you to use logical reasoning. There's actually this little bit of wiggle room that comes into play where it's not actually operating on strict logic and validity. Rather, they operate around what we call the LSAT common sense standards. It comes from the directions of, if we're in, I'm just gonna pull up the directions to a random test here. You don't actually have to have this test up, but if you are pulling up a test and starting a test and you open up the logical reasoning section here, the idea is that the directions have this question, or this statement rather, that in answering the questions, you should not make assumptions that are by common sense standards implausible, superfluous, or incompatible. And in that first lesson, we discussed how this LSAT common sense standard, as I call it, which operates on plausibility and superfluousness and compatibility, is not truly a 100% valid or not. It creates this little bit of wiggle room and gray in which we have to learn to either accept or not accept and adapt around it. And so that's where I kind of want to start today, is just kind of putting into action this idea of LSAT logic, of where it matters, where it doesn't. Now, one last thing of the review before we actually go into these questions. When we are judging logic, yes or no, what lesson one really focused on is that there are four main, what we call pillars or points of logic that you have to focus on. First comes structure. What is your evidence? What is your conclusion? As you can see in these examples, I'm going to separate it for you guys, but that's something that you as a skill will have to do on any given question at any given time, analyzing structure. We have to analyze the language. Are the words on target with each other? That's the terminology we use. Do these words actually mean those words? Are there certain subject matters, characteristics, other sort of parts that are missing in one part versus another that make them not actually align up? Or are they different words but yet still on target? And we see that sometimes too, where words that are not synonyms but still somehow come together to be on target with each other. So that's the idea of language. Degrees deals with three main degree issues. It's that probability and proportion is one of, like, none, some, many, most, all, understanding what we call strong versus semi-strong versus weak degrees, and making sure that we understand the difference in probability based on those words. Strong being 100%, most being more than 50%, or semi-strong rather being like most more than 50%, or less than 50%. That would also be a semi-strong if the language it means that probability, or weak just being too open-ended. If some of my friends like football, we have no idea how many, and so we call that weak language. And so we have to be analyzing that issue. That's just one of our degree issues. The second degree issue is the absolute versus relative, or the idea of comparative versus non-comparative language. Non-comparative being absolute language, comparative being relative language. If we say that studying will make you good on the LSAT, that is very different than saying studying will make you better on the LSAT. Studying may not make you good, but it may make you better. And those are totally, good versus better is the difference of absolute and relative. Good is absolute. It's a non-comparative. It may be a little gray in terms of what that actually means. What's a good LSAT score? Well, that really depends on the individual, depends on their goals, depends on a lot of factors, and who's asking. But good is still an absolute. It's non-comparative. It's just, you either meet it or not, even if we don't know what the exact standard is. Where getting better is a relative. It just means comparatively you are going to improve. And so that's our second degree issue. Our third degree issue is going to be the issues of correlation and cause. When they connect different ideas together, we have to ask ourselves, are they creating a level to which one thing is the reason for the other, or is the language insinuating just some sort of relationship, even if one isn't the reason for the other? And so we have to be able to analyze the language there. Everybody has learned before correlation doesn't equal cause, but as with so much of this test, it's about catching that issue that becomes key. The fourth pillar is conditionality. Now, I put it fourth because I want you worrying about it last. If you have been following all the homework, you'll see how many times I go through these questions. And even when there is conditionality present, you can answer a question without having to deal with that. The reason I like to do that is because, one, conditionality is the area of this test our brain is worst at. No matter how much you study conditionality, there are ways the LSAT will present it in ways that will convolute it to you, it will slow you down. And the reality is that if there's a language or degree issue, it actually really doesn't even matter whether there's a conditionality issue. It becomes irrelevant because the language isn't even on target, or the degree is not on target. Structurally, it doesn't matter. So you want to be dealing with conditionality last. But having said that, it is still one of our 4 pillars. So what is conditionality? Again, it's the if-then statements. It's the idea sufficient conditions, necessary conditions. It's when they say that one idea guarantees another. Within conditionality, as our quick recap here, we have 3 main issues. One, recognizing when you have conditionality. So when is it even at play? Generally, if, only, unless, or those 3 words I said, you just need to know those words in and out. 2, the other issue with understanding when you have conditionals is seeing strong words, strong probability words. Brandon always goes to work on Wednesdays, or Brandon goes to work every Wednesday. Those create the probability of 100%. So when you have those strong probability words, that creates conditionality. And that's when we would go to step 2 of conditionality, which is turning it into an if-then. When you have Brandon goes to work every Wednesday, does that mean that if Brandon goes to work, then it's a Wednesday? Or does that mean that if it's a Wednesday, then Brandon goes to work? And you have to make sure you have that direction down. Okay. And in that case, it would be if Brandon goes to work every Wednesday. If it's a Wednesday, then Brandon goes to work. It's not telling you that if Brandon's at work, that it's a Wednesday. And that's where conditionality really has to do with directions. Now, the third part of conditionality is the idea of being able to make valid inferences from conditional statements. We have a few main ways they do that. Most notably, there's the transitive, if A, then B, if B, then C. We could create a link. It's chaining language together. If A, then B, if B, then C does tell us if A, then C. Now, in terms of the other main way you need to understand conditionality, so that I even write it out here, if you get evidence that says if A, then B, we need to be ready for the 4 patterns of what I call the rule plus application, or the definitive applications of these conditional rules. So if you have evidence that says anytime you have A, you have B, we need to recognize that's created this conditional rule. And as evidence, it has to be accepted. So when we find out that Brandon has A and they conclude thus Brandon has B, that would be valid. We have to be ready for that. As opposed to if they say Brandon has B, thus Brandon has A, we have to be able to say that is invalid. Now, from here, just to quickly go through, normally I would call on someone, I was about to, but just to get through the rest of this review so we have more time for the new stuff, I'm going to lead the way. If we have an example that says Brandon does not have A, thus Brandon does not have B, we have to ask ourselves, is that valid? Is that following a pattern of this rule correctly? And the answer is no. By this point, we have to know that. We will be putting that into action more today with some things and with certain question types. It's going to correlate to that. But it is something that we're going to want to recognize also just based on the pattern. The idea is that if you have A arrow B and they start reversing the direction and they go B back to A, that is incorrect. You cannot reverse. In this one, they are doing the negative version, but with the same direction. Brandon doesn't have A to tell us he doesn't have B. We call that inverse logic, and that is confusing your necessary and sufficient conditions, and that is invalid. If they reverse and negate, if they say Brandon does not have B, thus Brandon does not have A, that is going to be valid because that is following the pattern we call the contrapositive. These 4 patterns are so important to just kind of memorize as patterns. An easy way to memorize it, as I've said in the past, you could think of it as just one change is not good. If you reverse, that's not okay. If you do the negative in the same direction, that's not okay. When you reverse and negate, the 2 wrongs do make a right, and then it would end up being valid. So we have to be ready for that logic. So that's recapping really just lesson 1. If any of that you're at all hesitant about, go back to lesson 1. Really important that you get that down. Now, once we got into lesson 2 and lesson 3, it was more of analyzing methodology of reasoning, especially when it's invalid, being able to call out different issues. When we call out different issues, we've described the process of calling out either a jump, fallacies, and overlooked options, so that if there is a mistake, we get better words to be able to describe those mistakes. Lesson 2 presented this idea and really went into jumps. Lesson 3, we went through a bunch of different fallacies. What we're going to be doing today is seeing how that comes up, all of that I just recapped, in our answer choices. Again, for those just joining, I see some people joining live right now that are new. Maybe you were skipping around in the recording. It's something that we want to make sure that we really have down. Okay. 1 second. I had a Zoom tool pop up. And just wanted to make sure I got rid of it there. Okay, so with that, we're going to go into some warm-up exercises here by me. What I was trying to pull up is the Zoom tool of participants so that I can start calling on some of our live participants for some examples that'll kind of put into action this review that we just did. So who wants to raise their hand and take a stab at one of these examples? Hi, Lexi. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. So thank you for participating. So with this example, the question's going to be, is the inference valid based on this evidence? It's a question that's rarely asked on the LSAT directly, but it is something that before we could get into comparing two different answers, I want us to reinforce the idea that every answer is either 100% right or 100% wrong. So I want you to be able to just analyze this as if it was just a yes or no question. So if we have evidence that says product X is unlikely to help people lose weight, can we conclude and infer that people who use product X to meet their weight loss goals are probably going to be disappointed?
I would say no.
Why not?
Because the thing that's kind of throwing me is this whole idea of disappointment.
Okay.
And, we're not really told, whether these people like they're really wanting to lose weight or what their necessarily goals are and whether that will create disappointment or not.
So you made a comment. You said that we don't really know what their goals are. Does this inference tell us within the inference, is it telling us what the goals of the people are that they're discussing in this answer choice?
I guess, yeah, weight loss goals.
Weight loss goals, yeah. So if they say that there are people, now let me ask this, are you new to this program or have you been following the previous lessons?
I've been following the previous lessons.
Okay, so with this, when we break it into parts, that divide of kind of two, how would you break this down?
In terms of like the subject?
Yeah, subject matter characteristic, exactly. Subject characteristic. How would you break it down?
Well, the subject I would say would be the people who are using the product.
And that's actually part of the issue. And this comes back to, and this is where I'm going to say a big thing, part of this lesson. At the end of this lesson, I have taught you everything you need to know. That doesn't mean everybody's going to be perfect at application of it. You still got to work on those fundamentals and exercises to make sure that we're better at it. Is it just anybody who uses X?
People who use X to meet their weight loss goals.
Yeah, it's people who use X to meet their weight loss goals. That's a special type of person. And what is the characteristic?
Probably going to be disappointed.
Disappointed. Now, I would say that this brings in this idea of what we call reference language, right? Like, what is it that they're going to be disappointed about?
They're going to be disappointed about the unlikelihood of losing weight.
Exactly. Exactly. So this is where I'm going to ask you again, would this be a valid inference based on, and remember, within the level of LSAT common sense, is this something that we could validly infer based on this one statement? Oops, sorry.
Then yes.
Yeah. And so this is one that we want to recognize. Now, even more, you didn't bring it up, but I know a lot of people like to bring up, what about the semi-strong language of unlikely? What would you say to those people?
I mean,
is that it creating an issue?
For me,
versus
it's
the
not.
inference? Why? What does the inference have that makes it on target?
Probably.
Yeah, probably. That's semi-strong degree again. And so it's on the same degree level.
Okay.
So any questions for me, Lexi?
Nope, that's it.
All right. Does anybody have any questions on that? So what I'm going to do, actually, I'm going to lower hands because I still have hands raised from when I asked for participants. Does anybody have any questions on that? All right. Crystal.
Yes, I was just wondering, and I missed the last two videos.
Sure.
And I guess I was just wondering, did you cover unlikely and probability, the degree language in those videos?
Lesson 1, I did it with the semi-strong degree. During the pillar of degrees, we talked about strong versus semi-strong versus weak, where strong is that 100%, semi-strong is the more or less than 50, and weak is that open-ended. So this is something that we covered there. Now, obviously, we also talk about it throughout the course. So we've been talking about it since then too. And if you do check out a lot of the homework explanation videos, I highlight that as well.
All right, thank you.
My pleasure. All right. Madeline.
Hi. So yes, it does, but at the same time, I guess my question I have is it doesn't answer my why. That's the only
What do you mean by
question
the
that
why?
came. It says people who use product X's to meet their weight loss goals are probably going to be disappointed.
Right.
I see how probably and unlikely line up, but it doesn't answer the question that pops in my head of why wouldn't it?
Well, so here's the question. And what to answer your question, your mind is going to maybe some of those real world things that we'd start asking ourselves, which is questioning evidence. How can we trust this evidence, right? Why would that, or why is that happening? Like explain that evidence. So those are two things that in our everyday lives, we just start to do when we hear someone say something, we want to be like, is it true? And then we also ask like, and why is that true? We try to understand. And that's a great mindset to have in your everyday life. But when it comes to LSAT and logic, it's actually a rule of logic. We have to accept evidence. And all we're asking with logical validity is if we were to accept that evidence, can that evidence be enough to prove 100% that conclusion? So if we accept that it's a fact that product X is unlikely to help lose weight, can we conclude then that people who use product X to meet their weight loss goals are probably going to be disappointed?
Yes.
Does any of what I just asked, quote unquote, care about why it's happening?
No.
No. And that's just some of the things that they're going to start playing on in wrong answers and other question types where they might go into the why, and the why is irrelevant to the yes or no question of validity.
Okay. That makes sense.
All right. So thank you for your question. I'm going to call on more. And this is kind of the goal of today, is to have a little bit more participation and get through some of these concepts, make sure it's all clicking to everybody. So I'm not going to be able to call on everybody. I see a whole bunch of hands raised. Going to call as many as possible with each of them. So Dorothy.
Hi.
Hi. How you doing?
So now I'm looking at what the example. So when if I had some answer choices to choose from, I would be looking for after I discovered what my inferences.
Let me say this. This is not what I would say if I was to say this as a question on the LSAT. One example would be that this would be the stimulus, and then they'd ask you which of the following could be properly inferred, and this would be a possible answer. And I'm just asking, is it the correct answer to an inference question? That's what all of these examples are going to be. So I'm not really doing this in reference of a specific example. It's more of just, do we understand the logic of what it means to be logically valid inference, like a logically valid inference? So all I'm asking you is, if we accept this evidence, can we, yes or no, prove that inference?
Right. And so if that was on our answer choice,
if they asked you which of the following could be properly inferred, and this is an answer choice, you'd have to pick it.
Okay. That's what I'm getting to.
Let's say just other question types. Let's say it was a main conclusion question and you were like, oh, this is my main conclusion. Then you'd have to say, is this saying the same thing? And so it could be a main conclusion question. Right. If it's like in any sort of most supported inference, or, maybe an agree, disagree, and they have some other line and you have to be able to tie. The idea is that being able to determine whether something is on target and valid is just a skill you have to do on every question at some point in time. So it's just one of those preliminary questions we have to be able to answer for ourselves of if we pull out and we say, this is our evidence, this is our conclusion, can we reach that conclusion based on this evidence? Yes or no? And that's what I'm trying to get through in this exercise.
Okay, well, thank you. One other additional piece I want to add, because I struggle sometimes with the logic reasoning, and it's like, with the timing of it,
Sure.
To be able to break it all down and be able to answer that within 1
Yeah,
minute.
so we're going to talk more about timing at the end of this lesson for sure.
Okay.
All right.
All right, thank
Thank
you.
you for your question. We'll take one more on this one and then I got to move on. So Alicia.
Hi. So my question's short. This is focused on logical reasoning. So these are those types of questions where
It's
it
also
says
reading
Brandon.
comprehension. No, it's also reading comprehension, because let's say this was in your passage and they're like, which of the following would the author most likely agree?
So I'm pretty strong on the inferences. My weakness is where they say Sally, Bob, Brandon, and Holly both got to be off on Thursday and Friday. Is this helping with that?
That's the game section, right? Is what you're talking about? Yeah, so this program is based on the logical reasoning and reading comprehension. I do have a games course. If you go to lsatwizard.com, video courses, you can find it.
Okay, thank you.
My pleasure. So, all right. So with that, we're going to go into example 2. I'm going to lower all hands and see who wants to volunteer for example 2. Vanessa.
Hi.
How are you doing today, Vanessa?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. So if the evidence was that over the last 40 years, group X has been sick more often and more seriously than group Y, and they want to conclude there's an answer that says group Y has been healthier on average than group X for the last few decades, would you say that is acceptable or not?
I would just say that it's invalid because it's jumping from an average. And we don't have a concrete number, but I would say that more often doesn't necessarily.
So if somebody is
I-
sick more, let me ask this, if somebody's sick more often and more seriously, so you're focused on that portion of this, right? So if I'm breaking it down into like subject matter characteristics, you're focused on the comparative characteristic. I'm going to give away that it's a relative comparative characteristic of it being of X versus Y or our subject matters. And the comparative characteristic is sick more often. It's 2 things. They're sick more often and more seriously. So if somebody is sick more often and more seriously, I guess my question is, can we say they are less healthy during that period? And I'm going to point out it is over the last 40 years. Let me actually ask you, if it says over the last 40 years and here it says for the last few decades, are those on target with each other?
No.
And this is where I'm going to say yes. Remember that generic language is okay. The last few decades is a little bit generic. And remember, generic is, could this be referring to this? Could they be the same? Or are they definitively, concretely different?
It could be.
Yeah, if they could be, we want to learn to accept that. If it said for the last decade, that would be definitively different. There's no way that for the last decade, let's say, let me just take out few and make it singular. If it said this for the last decade, that's totally wrong. Now we have no idea because this is definitively a different time period than that. But when they have that open-ended last few decades, this is that idea of broad versus generic. We did discuss this. This was part of lesson 1 as well, to go back to, of the generic versus broad and making sure we understand the difference. Huge issue on reading comprehension, understanding that. So here we're going to say then it's okay to say over the last 40 years and make a statement about the last few decades. That's okay. So the question then becomes, if somebody is sick more often and more seriously, could we say they've been less healthy?
I don't think so.
So this is going to be a really interesting one. And this is not actually, the prompt, the rest of it, the 40 years, group X, group Y, is not from an LSAT question. But there has been an LSAT question where they have done sick versus healthy, and they have made you within the LSAT common sense standards, except that if you are sick more often and more seriously, then the other group has been healthier. And now what I'm going to say is it would depend on the question type a little bit. When they say which of the following is most supported, they're opening themselves up to allow for a little more wiggle room than if they said which of the following would be properly inferred. If they said which of the following could be properly inferred, they wouldn't ask this. I really have a feeling they wouldn't, because the idea of LSAT common sense standard doesn't really come into play in strict inference questions. It's something we've talked about when we talk about those strict inference questions. But within the level of LSAT common sense, the question is the difference between being sick more often and more seriously superfluous difference or a meaningful difference versus the other group being healthier? And so what I'd have to ask you is, what other factors could matter about being healthier besides during that period of time? If you were sick more often and more seriously, would it even be possible for them to have been healthier? How could a group of people be sick more often and more seriously, but simultaneously be healthier? Can you think of a way?
The other group could have other like diseases that are.
Yeah, I mean, but if they have other diseases, what would the disease be if it's not more often and it's not more serious? Right? And so I want you to recognize that it's starting to close in on you here, right? Like the way I'm kind of phrasing it, it's starting to realize in your mind, wait, maybe there isn't a way. And so ultimately, I'm going to tell you, this is where you have to live and learn sometimes. you take it, if this was an actual LSAT question, which there has been a question out there where they did just the issue of sick versus healthy. So you have to just learn from that. It's just a learning experience. And you say, okay, they got me on this question, but from now on, I know that if one group's sick more often, then the other group has been healthier during that period of time. Doesn't make anything about a prediction in the future, but it would allow us to make a conclusion about this group. All right. So thank you, Vanessa, for that. Any questions on that one? I'm going to lower hands. Any questions on that one? Maria. How you doing, Maria?
Hi, I'm good. I just had a quick question. I wanted to know about.
I apologize. I'm going to have to put you on mute because it's not coming through clean right now. So I apologize. I'll call on you again if I see your hand raised in a little bit, but right now I'm going to have to mute you. It kind of just glitched out there. All right. I'm going to call on Catherine. Catherine, you there?
Yes, I'm there. Can you hear me?
I can. How you doing, Catherine?
Okay, I'm doing good. Okay, so typically I struggle in LR with inference questions.
Yeah.
I feel like I had a breakthrough. Okay, so let me ask you this. Hypothetically, if at the end,
the average part.
Oh, sorry. I think that Maria I see is on mute, but her voice is now coming through from the delay of the internet. So give it just a second, Catherine. You there, Catherine?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right, let's start again. So yeah, so what's the question?
So this is my question. At the end, where it says group X for the last few decades in the inference, if that would have said the last few years or the last year or so?
I'll say, I'm going to analyze each one. So last few years, I'm not sure if the last few years could be referring to the last 40 years because
exactly
that's starting to be a bigger stretch, right? Like few may not be a concrete meaning, but it's like 3, 4, 5. It's not 40, right? I don't think 40 we'd be like, oh, that's just a few years ago.
So I think this is helping me really understand inference questions a little bit better because basically what we're trying to get is the relative meaning. It doesn't have to be the exact.
Exactly. Within the level of, and I showed it in the instructions here, what the LSAT calls common sense standards. It's a learning experience constantly of what is and is not acceptable under common sense standards, but that is the standard we have to go by. And then you just keep learning and adapting the more you do this test and go, okay, so last few decades, that is last 40 years. You know, if they had last few years, I don't think I'd pick it, but let's just say hypothetically, you're reading a question and you cross it off. Now you review and they're like, wait a minute, they said this is the right answer. Now you'd have to learn and go, okay, I was wrong. And the LSAT wants me to say that last few years is on target with the last 40. I really don't think that would happen, but that's what would have to happen if they said this is the right answer when it said last few years.
Makes a lot of sense. I can just see how this was a valid argument because I said, you know, it's just the inference is kind of giving you the relative meaning of the evidence.
Exactly. So it is that comparative, right? It's just the question then of language, sick versus healthy. Are they on opposite ends, right? That's really what the question comes down to.
Okay. Thank you. This was very helpful.
Oh, sorry. I clicked on mute. Thank you for participating and happy to answer more questions as we keep going. So I'm going to move on here. I'm going to lower our hands. Who has a question? Who wants to participate? I see Anne, just Anne. Anne, how you doing? And I'm not sure if that's you, if that's still the voice from somebody else. I see you're actually on mute, so I'm going to have to ask you. I'm going to have to call on somebody else because you're on mute right now. So I apologize. Today's been interesting with the internet for sure. Lindsay, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. So help me out with example 3 here. If we have evidence that says that studies show that people who visit the beach at least one time per week have higher rates of skin cancer than people who do not, can we conclude then that going to the beach regularly increases your chances of skin cancer?
Yes. Yes.
So what's your hesitation? Tell me, what are the things you're kind of going through your brain right now of whether it is or is not?
I want to say it is because if you go to the beach, that means that you actually go. So that means at minimum you go once out of the 7 days of the week.
So I guess you're kind of focusing on like, is it at least one time per week regularly? Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yes. Oh, so it would be no, because you don't know what regularly is.
So just because we don't know what regularly is, I guess here's my question. Would you say that's within the level of LSAT common sense standards? Would you call evidence telling you that someone's going at least one time per week? Would you say that's on target with going regularly? If you found, so remember, it's also the direction of, are you going from this evidence to the conclusion or flipping it? If you have evidence that says somebody's going at least one time per week, would you say, if you found out you had a friend going to the beach at least one time per week, would you be comfortable within quote unquote common sense standards calling that regular attendance at the beach?
No.
So this is where I'm going to tell you, I think that's okay. Okay. I don't think you could reverse it. If we have evidence that says somebody's going to the beach regularly, I don't think we could say for sure that's at least one time per week. But if I have somebody that's going at least one time per week, I think that's consistent enough to be regular. Now, within LSAT common sense standards, remember, it's just a learning experience. I might be wrong versus what a test writer is thinking, but I'm pretty sure based on the examples I've seen in the past that going to the beach at least one time per week by common sense standards would create a level of us saying going to the beach regularly.
Right.
So let's say now I tell you to accept it. So if we do accept that going at least one time per week is the same as going to the beach regularly, would that then validate this inference?
Yes.
I'm going to tell you no.
No, oh no, I don't know.
Why not? Why not?
So
it's not the language.
Okay.
It's not the language of like subject matter and characteristic. And this is something the LSAT loves to do, is like kind of distract you with this other stuff so that you go through this debate of like regularly at least one and then go, okay, I guess I'll accept it. But they're distracting you from a whole different issue. I'll narrow it in. It's a degree issue.
Okay.
Remember, degrees has 3 different issues. There's the issues of strong versus semi-strong versus weak, which is that probability. There's the issue of absolute relative, meaning comparative language versus non-comparative language. And then there's the issues of correlation and cause.
Okay.
Which one of those issues do you think is kind of at play in this example?
Correlation and cause?
Yeah, it is at play. Let's start with the inference, the conclusion. Would you say that is correlation or cause? Are they establishing a cause in that inference?
Yes, because it's if you go to the beach at least one time per week.
I'm not asking about in this evidence. I'm asking about this language here.
Okay.
Would this language, going to the beach regularly, increases your chance of skin cancer? Would this language be considered causal language?
Yes.
It is. It's saying that the action of going to the beach would bring about the change of increasing your chances of skin cancer. Okay. And that is what cause is by definition. It doesn't have to be a guarantee. Some people have said to me, but it doesn't guarantee you're going to get skin cancer. Cause isn't about a guarantee. It is about just bringing about some sort of change in probability. But it has to be that it plays that role of bringing about that change. So now my question to you is the evidence causal, or is the evidence just correlation? Does the evidence create a relationship between going to the beach, actively bringing about that change, or is it more of a statistical fact that leaves open the possibility maybe of coincidence or some other explanation?
Cause.
So this is actually going to be correlation, and this is actually one of our most common types of correlation that I want to point out. We call it the statistical correlation. On the outline of lesson 1, the example I give for this is people who have X are more likely to have Y than people who do not have X. This language is not telling you that X is the reason for this relationship. It could be any other explanation. Maybe Y is leading to X. Maybe some third thing is bringing about the relationship between X and Y. We do have a relationship between X and Y, that correlation, but it's not telling you X is the reason for that relationship. Does this language that I just highlighted make sense as just a correlation? This is not saying that doing X will lead to Y. It's just saying that people who have X happen to have Y.
Okay, yes, that makes sense.
It's like just the statistical observation rather than actually bringing about that change.
Right.
Rather than X bringing about the change. We don't know that X is the explanation for it. How close is this highlight to this right here?
Pretty close. I mean, it fits. Like if you put the X as visiting the beach and the Y.
Yeah, versus people who do not, right? That's the do not have X. And they have Y, which is higher rates of skin cancer.
Right.
Notice how this doesn't tell us why it's happening. Okay, it's just being able to read that language and interpret it for its degree. It's not telling you that going to the beach is the reason for those higher rates. It's just telling you that people who go to the beach at least one time per week have higher rates. As opposed to this one is saying that the action of going to the beach is what's going to bring about your increase in chances of skin cancer.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
And so this would not be a valid inference. Rather, it would be falling for that fallacy we call confusing correlation with cause.
Okay.
All right. Any questions, Lindsay?
No, I don't have any questions.
All right. Thank you for your participation. I'm going to ask anybody have any questions on this example? Very important example. Kennedy, I think I actually saw your hand raised before. Did you have a question on this one or was it just raised from before?
Yes, I have a question in general about this before you go into the example. So is inference the same as assumption?
No. Assumption is something that we cover extensively in lesson 2 of the core lessons. So if you haven't checked out lesson 2, go back, watch that, because that's definitely a huge issue you need to know on the test.
Yeah, I knew about the necessary assumptions and stuff. Like I understand that, but I guess in the frame of this worksheet that we're doing, does it matter?
Well, an assumption would be the in between when something is, so if I said this evidence and then somebody reaches this conclusion, the assumption is what's missing of why this evidence is not this conclusion.
Perfect. Okay, so we're just doing
this example, all I'm asking is yes or no. When the answer is no, the assumption gets into the explanation for why. It's the gap.
Gotcha. I didn't see the question.
So this question's just, is it valid, yes or no? We're saying this inference is no. If we want to know why, now we could go into our assumptions.
Perfect. Thank you.
Which involves like the fallacy of it's assuming correlation equals cause.
Fantastic. Thank you.
All right. My pleasure. All right. So with that, who wants to volunteer for the next one? Example 4. I apologize if I mispronounce it. Adaku?
Hi.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm good.
So you ready for example 4?
Yes.
All right. Evidence says, as any successful entrepreneur can tell you, work ethic is required for success in business. So the question is, could we infer from this one sentence, can we then infer that applying yourself fully in business will lead to success in your endeavors?
I would say no.
Why not?
Because it says work ethic is required for success. So applying yourself will lead. Although work ethic is required, it doesn't mean that it's sufficient.
Yeah, good work. Absolutely. You're totally on it. You hit it on the head. So this is the issue of confusing necessary sufficient. So the question before is like, what's the assumption? Well, that would be like, what is, when you answer the question of no, and I ask you why not, that's getting into the mistakes. We're looking at language. Are there jumps? That's what a jump is. There's the fallacies. And you just called out and described the fallacy of confusing necessary with sufficient conditions. They were saying work ethic is required. That's a necessary condition, and then started treating it as if it was sufficient. So your description was getting into the fallacies, which is great. I always said jumps and fallacies are my favorite way to describe problems. The third way would be like an overlooked option, which in necessary sufficient would be like any other way, that all the other factors rather towards success besides work ethic. Okay. So any questions with that, Adaku?
No, that makes sense.
All right. Thank you. Good work. Any questions on, I'm going to lower hands. Anybody have questions on this one? Asia. Hi, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm good. Your volume's a little bit low. If you don't mind talking into the mic a little bit louder.
Okay, I have my AirPods in. Can you hear me a little bit better?
Not really, to be honest. I apologize. If you want to ask the question.
Okay, I feel like you can hear me
Oh,
better
there we go.
now.
That was perfect. Perfect. Now you're here. What's going on?
Oh, you can hear me better now?
Absolutely.
All right, great. So yeah, I know like a lot of answer choices for sufficient and necessary. Like I don't know if it'll always say like if that is sufficient and necessary. Like I don't think it'll always say that it's confusing the sufficient with the necessary straight out like that. But would a good answer choice just be like it fails to consider that, and then it'll present like something else that could cause that necessary?
Not that could, so you're close. So remember that fails to consider could always arise. That's related to the concept of what we call overlooked options. It's another way to describe a problem. So when we're talking about the words necessary and sufficient, we're talking about the fallacy type. So remember, there are three ways to describe a problem: calling out the jump, calling out the fallacy, or describing overlooked options, things that the argument is overlooking. When you say fails to consider, you are going into the overlooked options. Now, what you said is other things that could bring about the necessary. That's actually not the, I guess, yeah, sorry. Well, sorry, no. It's other. So if work ethic is required for success, it's one necessary condition. What we're overlooking are other conditions that could lead to that sufficient. Like, so in this case, just to make sure we're on the same page with the work ethic and success, the idea here is that work ethic is just one thing. It's not the way you said it is that it would be what other ways to get work ethic. We don't care about other ways that would lead to work ethic. We care about things that would be required for success. So it's other necessaries for that sufficient, not other things that lead to that necessary.
Yeah, that's what I meant. I'm sorry. So,
No, it's fine. And just notice how I caught that kind of right away. That's just the idea of, a high level LSAT score is able to catch those subtleties. So not just for you and your wording of it, but for anybody else watching it, hopefully you caught the way she said that too. Notice how technical I'm going to be with every student at every time. I try to always call that out because those little discrepancies are exactly where we're kind of building up to right now. We have one more example 5, and then we're going to get into the trap answers. And they know what's going on in your brain in terms of those issues. And I know what's going on, and that's how they're going to trap you. Okay. It could be exactly that.
Okay. But like, so it still wouldn't be a fail to consider answer choice.
That would have been, if it said fail to consider other requirements for success, that would be correct.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
But if it said other ways to bring about work ethic, that would be incorrect.
Right. Okay.
All right. Thank you for your question. All right. So who wants to volunteer for number 5? Without seeing it yet. All right. Elizabeth.
Hi.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. So if we have evidence that says, when presented with the moral dilemma of being able to benefit oneself at the expense of others, a person will be acting immorally if there were alternatives that existed that could have minimized the detrimental impacts on others. From that statement, can we infer that it is wrong for a person to choose to act in ways that benefit themselves and hurt other people when refraining from acting would have avoided any negative consequences?
Give me a second.
And I'll give you a second to read it. Yeah. This is my intentional idea. This was like, I don't know if you particularly watched lesson 1, but we talked about like the grad students with engineering degrees who take night classes, work extra hard in any in-class assignment given to them on a Friday before a holiday weekend. We have to make sure that we're accounting for the full extension of a parts. Notice these are both just one sentence.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna say no.
Why not?
Because this one's kind of,
Yeah, and so I'm going to give you a second here, and it's funny. I pulled up the chat just because I was curious what other people were saying about this. I usually don't pull up the chat during it, but I see people saying like, I don't even know how you read this so far. I'm having trouble comprehending the evidence, right?
Yeah,
And
that's
so
my
this is
dilemma.
just a good example of where language gets really dense on this test, and there's going to be challenging questions. And again, people are like, how does this relate? Well, it could be a logical reason. It could be a reading comprehension. It could be at any time you get this language, you got to be able to break it down. So let's make sure we can picture this. I'll help you break this one down, Elizabeth. So they have this idea of when we are, don't even worry about the conditionality. So I don't know if you're starting to think about, let me start diagramming. Conditionality is, I'll tell you 4 out of 5 times a trap of trying to start diagramming. Okay. It's going to be the last thing we're worried about. Let's just make sure we even understand the language of what we're talking about. So when presented with a moral dilemma of being able to benefit oneself at the expense of others, let me pause. Does that make sense of the scope of what we're even talking about here? Just that portion? So there's a moral dilemma, and it's between benefiting oneself at the expense of others, right? What they're saying is then it will be immoral if there were alternatives out there that could have minimized the detrimental impact on others. So I want you to say it back to me. What is this evidence telling us?
If there was a way to like prevent what happened.
Yep.
And minimize harm on others, it would be immoral. They would be acting immorally if there was like an alternative way to prevent the harm of others.
So now I'm going to ask you this. Would this then allow us to validly conclude this, that it's wrong for a person? So would you say wrong is okay in terms of like the moral, immoral?
Say that again.
So it says it is wrong. Would acting immorally be something you'd say is on target with being wrong? Yeah, and this is something that from a LSAT common sense standard, they have made you do at times, realizing that saying something is immoral is saying it's wrong. It's okay to say it's wrong to do something, to act immorally. Now, we can't conclude something's immoral without a standard. We can't conclude something's wrong without some sort of standard for it. So we can't say Brandon stole a cell phone, therefore he was wrong, or therefore he was immoral. But if they tell you it is immoral to do X and you do X, then it was wrong for you to do X. That's okay. All right. So the question is from here, did this person choose something that's going to trigger this condition, this standard for the morality? Did they, when somebody chooses to act in a way that benefits themselves and hurts other people, let me just pause there. Is that kind of what, like, does that check off some of this up here? Like, is that on target with what they were talking about? Benefiting yourself and hurting other people?
Yes.
Yes.
But
when refraining from acting would have avoided any negative consequences. Does that give us this last portion that says that there was an alternative that existed that could have minimized the detrimental impact on others?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I guess it is valid.
Yeah, this to me is valid. This is one that I wrote to just try and like, I saw someone in the chat go, it's all a trap. Yes, it's all a trap. I even trapped you to make traps, right? This is the LSAT.
Honestly, like I couldn't even break it down. Honestly, I was like reading so fast that I didn't even really understand what I was being asked.
And that's what the point of this exercise is. And this is where I want you to realize that's the LSAT. That's this test. Don't rush. You can never rush when reading. Now, if there's a question when you're getting into it that you're just like, I'm trying to read this twice and it definitely it's just not clicking to me, wave the white flag. No one question is worth the double loss is what I call it. You got to learn to avoid the double loss. If you're like a football fan and the quarterback is, trying to scramble on a play because it's going bad, like don't lose the game on that one play. Just throw the ball away and go for another play is what I give the analogy of. Like same thing on a question on LR. If you're getting, or on reading, if you end up getting stuck and you're like, oh, I'm having trouble break this down. Don't spend 5 minutes on it because the reality is you're still going to lose on it. You're never going to be validly 100%. Then just don't double lose by sinking 5 minutes into it. Okay. So that's going to be a big piece of advice that I wanted to lead to along the way. And like, if you weren't sure on this, whatever, don't stress one way or the other from it.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you. Any questions on this exercise so far? I'm going to lower all hands so that I can just make sure that the questions are going to be on this. Now, I'm going to be doing timing later. So if it's a question about timing, I'm still going to answer that later, but about this exercise. So Emma?
Hi. So thank you, first of all. My question is about this one, number 5. So I, at first read through, I was like, yes, that's valid. But then the only question I could come up with when everybody was like deliberating on it was the part where it says in the evidence, if there were alternatives, would an alternative, like you can consider reframing an alternative rather than another
Let's
action.
break that down by LSAT common sense standards. Would you say that that if you could refrain and
yes.
avoid the consequences, would that have been an alternative?
Yes. I mean, it was just confusing because in your head, I guess what you're saying, this whole idea of you're having to retrain yourself, but like normally I would say, no, that's not an alternative, but I guess technically
That's
it is.
exactly what the exercise is about, right? So like our everyday life, you'd be like, yes, that's on target. And then I'm like, wait, but you got to analyze every single word and make sure that it's on target. And then you're like, okay, so no. And then it's like, wait, but there's this LSAT common sense standard where we have to more dive into the meaning of the word and see if it's within this common sense standard. And in this case, it's still yes.
Right. Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much.
That's exactly the back and forth of this test. Yes. Thank
All
you.
right.
So one more question. We got one more hand raised. Madison.
Yeah, I'm just confused because I feel like I've done logic reasoning a lot, and it's just like the thing that tripped me up was like minimize and then like any negative consequences. Like I feel like
let me ask you something this
isn't-
way. If we have a situation that would have avoided any negative consequence, would that trigger a condition that says that there was a way to minimize?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So I think you're onto something in terms of degree. Okay.
Yeah.
If the conditional rule was about avoiding any negative consequence, and they tell you there's a situation that would minimize it, that wouldn't be on target. So using a scenario of minimizing does not trigger a condition that you need to avoid it. But if you could have avoided it, then there was a way to minimize it.
Okay, that makes sense.
All right. So good point of like seeing that logical difference, but we just got to know which direction they're kind of basing it on. All right. So, one more, just because I saw a couple more hands go up. So, and it was just Anne from before. I'm going to see if maybe her internet's better right now. How you doing, Anne?
Yeah, I'm good. I had my Beats, whatever, I don't know,
Gotcha,
something
no
connected,
problem.
so it didn't
I
work.
got to call on you again.
So the answer is invalid. Is that correct?
No, this one is valid. This one
valid.
is valid. Yes, it would be yes. It is valid.
Aren't morals? You know, they're different for every person, but like ethics is kind of like a universal standard. You know, like for like, oh, like abortion is immoral. You know, I mean, that's why I don't understand this question.
So remember that premises have to be accepted as true. Okay, this is kind of like when I said earlier of like, was it one of the examples I gave? No, I think I said it verbally. It was the idea of getting a good LSAT score. I said verbally. And it was like, what is a good LSAT score? You and me probably have different standards of what a good LSAT score is. And everybody in this room probably has a different standard for what a good LSAT score is. But if they say, if you study, then you'll get a good score, and Brandon studies, we could say the words that he got a good score. We can't say he got a 170, 160. Like we don't know what that is, but we could say the words validly that he got a good score, even though we would disagree on what a good score is, because the evidence has to be accepted as true for whatever that language is. So similarly here, when the evidence is creating a standard for what is immoral, they're telling you if you do this, it's a fact that it's immoral. You may disagree with exactly what the morality is, but evidence has to be accepted as true. So if they're telling you, so I don't like to go to these political ones, whatever, but I'm just going to do it because you said
Please
it.
do.
So the abortion is immoral. Obviously, we have, when I say we, the world has major differences in opinion about that answer. But if the LSAT says in an example, evidence, abortion is immoral, Brandon got an abortion, then Brandon would be immoral. Okay, that would be something we'd have to accept, even if we morally disagree with that.
Okay, because you said evidence is like
because the evidence is fact. Exactly.
Okay, thanks.
So just to clarify that. All right. So thank you, Anne, for that question. With that, we're going to go into the next kind of exercise here, which is now taking this to the next example. or taking it to the next level, I should say, which is dealing with traps. So what I'm going to do is, instead of a yes or no, I'm going to give you guys a question, and there's going to be two possible answers. These are not real LSAT questions. These are just some logical examples. These aren't even meant to mimic LSAT questions. It's meant to mimic LSAT logic maybe, but not actual LSAT questions. Obviously, Brandon refused to study for the LSAT. It's not an LSAT question. But the idea is that I'm giving you potential answers to a certain logical question that's going to relate directly to the types of traps that you see. Out of these two answers, one will be correct, one will be incorrect. Okay, before I even get into this, the reason I'm doing this, what the outline even talks about, the most common thing I hear all the time from basically every student, whether you're scoring from 150 to one, I've had students this year, had a student get a 179, 177. Those students, same thing. They will say to me, Brandon, on every question I get wrong, I look at it and I was between two and I ended up picking the wrong one. Okay, that's true for every single person. It's a very important thing. It's going to relate actually even more. I'm going to bring up now this idea of a drill we're going to talk about at the end of this lesson called the confident drill will help you separate that issue. But the idea is everybody, when you're not confident, when you're not sure, it means you're missing something. Okay. It tells you that you're going to be between two. Sorry, I'm saying this kind of wrong. Let me say it this way. When you have a general understanding of what's going on, the LSAT is not too hard on most questions to narrow down to two. Okay, when you use your general instincts to guide you, you will generally be able to get down to two. There's obviously exceptions to that, but for the overwhelming majority of questions, it's not so hard to get to two. The key is, are you going to be just blindly guessing 50-50? Or are you going to have some semblance of logic that's going to separate it? There's always a reason why the wrong answer is wrong. Now, we know that we've been talking about this LSAT gray that happens, the common sense standard. And so once in a while, somebody like myself will even get questions wrong. I get questions wrong. Okay. And most of the time it's going to be because of something that's gray or I miss something. It's one of those two. Okay. But I'll tell you that the idea of gray comes up on so few questions. It's so easy for somebody to be like, oh, that's just a gray issue. That's one of those gray issues. I'm telling you, it's not. Okay. There are very, very, very few questions that are on that. So I'm saying with the most limited exceptions, overwhelming majority of questions have very strict logic as to why the right answer is right and the wrong answer is wrong. To reinforce that one more time, the wrong answer has something logically wrong with it. We need to have the ability to figure out why it's wrong. So with that, we are now going to go into this exercise where there are two answers, two very tempting answers. To some degree, it's going to be tempting. We have to figure out which one's right and which one's wrong. My best advice to you, when you have two answers and you're down to two, compare the logical difference of those two answers. Okay. Then compare it to the logic of the stimulus. So you're kind of doing this three-way triangle of comparison and figuring out what logical issues matter or not. Language, degree, conditionality. Those are the things that are going to come up. Your different fallacies could get more nuanced in that analysis. Okay. But the idea is every one of these examples I'm about to give you, the ones I'm about to give you, it's always going to come down to black and white logic. Okay. The outline actually lists the traps, and these are the examples listed. So if you want to cheat on this example, you could go back to the outline and go look. But these examples I'm going to do with putting you guys to the test. So hopefully you guys aren't cheating when I call on you guys here, but I will tell you all of these examples are directly on the outline. So with that being said, who wants to volunteer for the first one? Anthony. How you doing, Anthony? Did I click on you? Did I miss you? Oh, no, I got you.
Going today.
How you doing?
So I'm not cheating, full disclosure.
What's that?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
I'm not cheating, full disclosure.
Okay, perfect. So with this, Brandon refused to study for the LSAT. As a result, he will not get a good grade on the LSAT. Which of the following is an assumption required by the argument above? People who study for the LSAT will get good grades, or there is nobody on the planet who is able to score well on the LSAT without putting in at least some time studying. I'll give you a second to read it.
Nobody on the planet who is able to score well on the LSAT. Oh, wait a minute.
So here's going to be my biggest key now to going between traps. It's not about why the right answer is right. I want to know why is the wrong one wrong. So if you're saying this second one is the one you'd go with, why is the first answer choice wrong?
Will get good grades.
What do you mean?
Will
That's
good-
not a full explanation. Give me more words.
He will not get a good grade on the LSAT. Doesn't mean that people who study for the LSAT will get good grades.
So if I asked you in your own words, this argument here, we know it's invalid. They're telling you there's an assumption. What is the assumption in your own words underlying this argument in the stimulus?
People who study will get good grades.
So this is saying that studying will lead to good grades? What I have highlighted here?
Mine's just slow. It's not highlighting. I'm sorry.
Okay, so the stimulus where it says Brandon refused to study for the LSAT. As a result, he will not get a good grade. What's wrong with that?
It's I don't know. You're gonna have to guide me here. I'm sorry.
Sure. So is there some sort of jump going on here? I'm going to guide you. I think it is a jump. I would mentally be thinking of it as a jump. What's the jump in language here? And let me ask you, Anthony, is this your first lesson with me, or have you been following?
Actually, I was on last week.
You were on last week. Okay, but not the week.
Yeah.
Were you on lesson one or two?
Actually, all three.
Okay,
It's just a matter of, I think, my
remember, we go to the conclusion, right? We ask, so what's the conclusion?
he will not get a good grade on the
Let's
LSAT.
break it down into language. Subject matter, characteristic. What's our subject matter?
He and the
which is
characteristic.
right? And then the characteristic will not get a good grade. Do we have evidence on target with he or Brandon? Just a yes or no question.
Yes.
Yes. Do we? So the subject matter is not a problem here. The characteristic he will not of not getting a good grade. Do we have evidence that backs that up, or are they just trying to take a different characteristic to be on target with that?
Trying to take a different characteristic.
What is that different characteristic?
Refuse to study for the LSAT.
Exactly. So now when we have a jump, do you remember like the feathers and birds example?
Yeah.
Okay. Were they jumping from feathers to birds or from birds to feathers?
They were jumping from feathers to birds.
Right. So in this one, what is the jump?
The jump is from study for the LSAT to get good grade, not get a good grade.
So that if you do study, then you will not get a good grade? And I'm going to be really nitpicky with you because that's what you just told me.
No.
No. So what's the jump?
Refuse to study for the LSAT jumps to not getting a good grade on the LSAT.
100% correct as a pre-answer. So I call that the pre-answer, what you want to think about in advance of an argument. Okay, that's a perfect description of a problem. We call that a jump. It's that perfect assumption. So now, what would make this one wrong then? You said the jump is that refusing to study for the LSAT means you won't get a good grade on the LSAT. So why is this first one not correct?
I think it is correct now.
So now you're going to
well, it's not correct because it jumps from people who study. The contrapositive isn't negated.
Okay, so you're bringing up the right idea. This is where I a lot of times I have students that are like bringing up the right idea and I think they get it, but they're not using the exact right terminology. So if I was to say those 4 patterns from before, are they going with the flow? Are they reversing it? Are they going negative with the flow? Or did they do the reverse and negate?
They did they reversed it.
I would think it's kind of negating, but the same direction, right? Because this was negative study to not getting a good grade, where this one's saying studying will lead to good grades.
Okay, gotcha.
So if I was to like pre-answer, let me just kind of actually just do a new document. I'll put it off on the side here so that I can kind of have it on the side. So you were saying refused to study, arrow, not good grade. When this answer is saying study, arrow, good grade. Those are following the same flow of language, but in the negative way, right? They are negative of each other, but the same direction. That is inverse logic. These are inverse of each other and not correct. It's not the contrapositive. What would have been the contrapositive of the jump of what you said?
People who study will get good grades on the LSAT.
That's this answer here.
Except to people.
So that remember, the contrapositive is reversing and negating.
Okay. So you will get a good grade if you accept studying.
No, not if. If you get a good grade, reverse it and turn it so this becomes your if, but the negative of that. So we're going to take out not. So if you get a good grade, then what happened? Then you must have studied. This would be the correct answer as well. If they said if you get a good grade, then you studied, that would have been a correct answer. Okay, but saying that studying guarantees good grades is not the same logic. So this is the trap of an inverse, converse, confusing, necessary, sufficient, incorrect, contrapositive, whatever you want to call it. And I'll show it to you guys on this outline here. Okay, so when we talk about this trap, this one right here, inverse, converse, that is this trap right here. Okay, so the jump is that not studying leads to not getting a good grade. This first answer is inverse, saying that studying leads to a good grade, as opposed to not studying leading to not a good grade. Okay, make sense, Anthony?
Yes, kind of, sort of.
Sure. So definitely go back to lesson 2 as well, because this very much relates to that birds and feathers and birds. And there's the answer that says all birds have feathers. Go back to that one because this is the same logic as that trap answer of all birds have feathers.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Anthony. Let me see. Any questions on this? I'm going to lower hands. Any questions on this one? Emma.
Hi again. Okay, so I think for this one, could you have used that negation for the second answer?
Absolutely. And I in the outline, I think I do talk about it, but yeah, we definitely, there's a necessary assumption question. So we should be doing the negation, right? So what is the negation, Emma, of this?
It's there is nobody on the planet who is not able to score well on the LSAT without
Actually,
putting in.
Too strong of a degree. Let me ask this. Are there any degree words in this?
Some or nobody. Okay.
Nobody. So remember degree words of like.
So, okay. So there is somebody.
Exactly. So negating nobody, there is somebody on the planet who's
Okay.
able to score well without.
And that could be Brandon.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yes.
Gotcha.
Now, as a reminder, I do have to study.
Okay.
Not something that comes naturally. My cold was a 153, so it's not like it started in the 170s or anything like that. So, but yeah, if you negate this and there is somebody in this example, it could have been Brandon. And so that's why it would be a problem for this argument.
Okay. But I mean, that way, because that's how I did it. And maybe for Anthony, like,
yep,
it could be good to not have to do the like if then. You could just do the negation.
Absolutely. And that's for any question type. What I just wanted to highlight, what I was trying to highlight with Anthony and for everybody was the idea of this trap of just realizing it's reverse. Because if you negate it, it could still kind of get confusing. I don't know if you were with us for that feathers and birds example, but even when we negated the feathers and birds, the one that said all birds have feathers, there's still a bunch of people who are like, but that does weaken the argument.
Right.
So
Okay.
it's like, it's easy to sometimes do the negation and see why this is right. Remember, every answer on this outline is going from here on in for this trap exercise. Every answer is going to be at least to some level tempting. Right. And so the question is, what is that subtle reason why the wrong one's wrong?
Okay, perfect.
All right.
Thank you.
And so this is just reverse. The easiest way to see it is reverse. If you negate it, yeah, it wouldn't actually be a problem. Negation of this one would be people who study do not always get good grades. So that's actually highlighting the problem here. It would be about people not getting good grades. We were concluding he's not getting a good grade, so it wouldn't actually weaken the argument.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
All right. My pleasure. Thank you, Emma. Oh, I think I just clicked on you again after you muted yourself. So, okay. So let's go to, I'm going past here. All right. Lowering hands. Who wants to do the next one? Kennedy, how you doing?
Good. How are
You
you?
ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right. So over the last 10 years, students who majored in political science have typically pursued a career in either law or politics. Which of the following is most supported by the information above? A career in law or politics has been the goal for most political science majors over the last decade. Or for the last decade, most students with an interest in political science have chosen to pursue a career in politics or law. I'll let you read it.
Okay. So I'm thinking that the first one isn't right because it's saying that it's the word goal for me, because in the stimulus, they didn't really talk about a goal.
Is there
They just
anything
said
that
they
might be on
typically
target? Like let's kind of play this back and forth game, devil's advocate with ourselves. Is there anything that might be on target with a goal?
Is there any in the stimulus?
Yeah.
No, not to me.
If you have a pursuit,
Hmm.
if you are pursuing a career in law or politics, could we call that a goal?
Yes.
I don't know. I haven't answered it. Yes.
Wait, if you pursued, could you call? No, actually, no. I don't think just because you pursue something doesn't mean that it's your goal to pursue something. You could have pursued it because you need, I don't know. Wait, can you?
See, and this is where I'm going to say this. When at most, would you agree that within the LSAT common sense standard, this would be like gray at like the most far part we could get would still be kind of gray?
Right.
Okay, my rule of thumb for myself and for you guys, when it's gray, accept it and see if there's something else that you can go on. If there's no other issue, then maybe go to the other answer and see if there's something. So if I was to say to you that second one is wrong, I'm not saying it is, what would you say is the best like what's the thing you like the least? This is the thing I like to do. Compare the language, logic, everything of the answers.
Okay, so this one is for the last decade, most students with an interest in political science have chosen to pursue a career in politics or law with an interest. So I'm guessing like because they had the interest in, because they pursued, because they had the interest, I can like assume that that's what, from LSAT logic, that interest means that you decided to major in it, like majoring in interest is the
So
same
you're saying
thing.
that LSAT common sense. If you have an interest in it, that means you major in it?
Oh no. See, as
So
soon as
wait,
you
so let
ask
me
the
ask you that.
question,
So you
I'm like,
highlighted two
no.
different language things. Which one do you think is quote unquote closer? That your pursuits are goals, or that your major means the interest, and interest means majoring?
Definitely the last one for sure. The
Is which
interest
one?
is not strong enough to
Is
say
right.
that.
The interest is the trap. Exactly. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes perfect sense.
Include most students with an interest, because that could include a lot of people that aren't majors.
Right.
Goal from pursuit, I think, is within that LSAT common sense standard.
Gotcha.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kennedy. All right. So, question. I'm going to lower all hands. Question on that one. Catherine.
I guess to me, I don't really see the LSAT logic with pursue a career and goal, because the first time I read it, I kind of thought, what if they only pursue the career because that's just kind of like what happened? They didn't necessarily have the goal when they were political science.
If you are pursuing something, what else would you say it's like synonymous with?
Well, like to me, I was thinking, what if it was like the scenario where, sorry. I was thinking, what if it's a scenario where political science majors just have no other career they can take, and then.
But once you start going on that pursuit, doesn't it become a purpose, a mission, a goal? Like, isn't that like what you are ultimately trying to accomplish?
I guess.
Like to within this close enough definition that, remember, we have this LSAT common sense is the difference between a pursuit and a goal. By LSAT common sense, I keep this definition up here. Is it a superfluous difference or a meaningful difference? Are the differences that you're coming up with a meaningful difference, or LSAT common sense close enough? I'm just going to tell you, this is one of those live and learn too, but I'll tell you, I see a pursuit as a goal. It's a purpose, it's a pursuit, it's a goal. That is your mission in that action. It doesn't mean it's your primary goal. It doesn't mean it's the sole goal or your lifelong dream. I'm not saying that. I think all of those would be different, but it is a goal. It's a pursuit. It's a mission, a goal, a pursuit.
Okay.
It's one objective.
And typically though, will there always like so I can see how
How about if I changed a goal? What if I said that?
Oh wait, sorry, what? I didn't hear.
All I did was just change the word the to a goal. If I had a career in politics, has been a goal for most political. Would that resolve it? I probably would say that would make it even better, right?
Right.
Yeah. Now, obviously, I wrote these questions. These aren't real questions, but I just think the language of pursuit and goal is a superfluous one, where the difference between an interest and a major is like definitively different.
Right.
Those
yeah.
are
And typically, will there be like a reason other than just this gray, like interpreting?
Yes. So what I'm kind of highlighting, so I said this list here is a list on this concept list is the different kinds of trap issues, why the wrong ones are wrong. So the first one I did was inverse converse. There was nothing from the language that was gray. It was just reverse logic, right? The wrong answer was wrong because it was reversed. This one is the trap of language jumps.
Okay.
Okay.
Right.
So we have to be able to recognize that this wrong answer had a major language jump in it.
Okay, thanks.
And if you see that major language jump, yep. And then for everybody, when you have that major language jump, you got to be able to realize it and just eliminate it and realize this is just a totally different issue, makes it totally wrong. As I've said, with any grade, just learn to accept it and find something else. Because 9 out of 10, the difference. So what I'll highlight here, Catherine, one last thing. We're kind of in this debate of yes or no. That's like this question when I was asking it earlier, like, is it valid, yes or no? But if I tell you these are the two on the LSAT, there's a level to which, where am I here on this? If I'm telling you these are the two answers, there's a level to which we just have to be able to use process of elimination and say, this one's not even a contender. Once you even realize that interest issue, it can't be a contender for you anymore. It's got to be definitively wrong. And so anything that's within that level of gray generally gets accepted.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
They wouldn't do, let me say it this way, one last thing. They wouldn't do a career in law or politics has been a goal for most political science majors versus a career in law or politics has been a pursuit of most political science majors. Like they wouldn't do those two side by side and then be like, well, goal or pursuit. Like that's too gray for them to test on. So that's what I'm trying to get at. There can be gray things on a lot of questions, but the difference between the right or wrong answer is not going to be a gray issue.
Okay.
You might have to accept a gray issue to make it the correct answer, but the wrong answer is going to have something much stronger logic. And that's kind of the point of this trap exercise. Does that explain it?
Yeah. And that actually puts it in better perspective. Like on an actual test, there's 5 answer choices. It'll look a lot more drastically different.
Yeah. So the 4 wrong answers, my point is there's some, even when you're between 2, the wrong one has something majorly logically wrong with it that's different than just a gray language thing. Don't let the thing in your mind, like how goal versus pursuit, and we're like, I'm not sure. I want you to generally err on the side of accepting it. Try to find a better reason why the other ones may be wrong. Because find better reasons that wrong answers are wrong than just gray. Because it's not typically going to be gray. That's not the reason the wrong one's wrong. Wrong answers will not be wrong because of gray with the most minimal exception. Even though gray comes up on a lot of questions in the right answers. Okay. So with that, who wants to volunteer for the next one? And we're gonna do one more and then take our break. Sandra.
Hi.
How you doing, Sandra?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. So let's do this next one. Kind of a spin on something we've been talking about and did in the other ones. But paleontologists found fossils of a feather from 50 million years ago. Thus, birds came about 50 million years ago. Which of the following would weaken the argument? Paleontologists are not able to accurately date the age of fossils, or it is theorized that T-Rex had feathers?
Gee, I always have trouble on these weakening questions, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to volunteer. I'm gonna say that they can't, if they can't accurately date it. But let me see. But I'm one of those person that I'm always picking.
What did I say about this exercise?
Yeah.
Why are we doing this? Because
yeah, that's why I'm looking at this, because
there
if
is
my mind, my likelihood or whatever my mind wants to pick accurately date the age of fossils, but I'm just going to say the other one because I've been trying to do that and it's been working.
What's that? At what?
No, but when I'm really glad you're doing this because when I've been doing the PTs, I've been actually picking the other one. And because I've been down to like 1 or 2 for the ones that I miss. And so this is really.
What is the suggestion or implication behind that answer choice A, that first one there?
Well, they're saying that
like if
they're going against the evidence.
Fossils, what did you just say? Repeat those words.
They're going against the evidence.
Is that allowed?
Oh my God. Well, it's a weekend, right?
In a weekend, in logic, are you allowed to go against?
Oh my God. No, I'm not. I have to accept the evidence.
Accept the evidence, okay?
Yes.
Yeah. So we have to be able to recognize the implication of A is that it's going against the evidence, that it's not actually a 50 million year old feather.
So if I pick
that alone is a reason to eliminate it. Now, here's what I'm going to say, because I remember getting into this when we discussed it in lesson 2.
Yeah, I remember something like this.
People were like, but doesn't it still go against? The reality is, okay, there's never actually an answer that goes against the evidence. This answer choice doesn't actually go against the evidence. The suggestion of the answer is going against the evidence, but it never actually goes against the evidence. If there is, let me just say this, in a hypothetical world in which they do have an answer that is concretely disagreeing with evidence, I guess in theory, it would be the correct answer, okay? But in a logic-based test, they will never go against the evidence, okay? Because we have to accept the evidence. Now, why does this not accept the evidence? Why does this not actually disagree with the evidence? Let me ask you this, Sandra. Who did the dating process in the first, according to that first sentence, when they say paleontologists found a fossil of a feather from 50 million years ago?
The paleontologist.
It says that they dated it. They're the ones that dated it.
Well, they found the feather. They found the fossil feather from 50 million years ago.
They're the ones that found it, but they said in this language that the paleontologists are the ones that concluded it's 50 million years old. What if Brandon found a fossil in his backyard and it turned out to be 50 million years old? That means Brandon's the one that dated it?
No,
that language as it's phrased does not tell you that the paleontologist did the dating. So when you get answer choice A or the first one or whatever, paleontologists are not able to accurately date the age of fossils. No one said the paleontologist dated it. Now, that's kind of my point to all of this trap exercise is once you get this list of traps and you start recognizing it, you kind of made that comment. You're like, oh my God, I'm not allowed to do it. Just realize it's trying to go against evidence. That's always what I should be saying. It's trying to go against evidence. It never actually does. But any answer that even tries to go against evidence, just cross it off. It's a trap.
Yeah, and I think we had this. Did we have this question?
Very similar. It's a spin on it. The language changed just a little bit. It was a necessary assumption question that we did in lesson 2, but yes.
Okay, but I really appreciate you going over this because I really get it now. I mean, I think this has been the last part that I need to. Thank you. I got it.
Well, that's where I kind of finished on this. I wanted to.
Because this is like this would totally prove it wrong. The second one. Yeah.
Exactly. Whereas, exactly. So the jump is feathers to birds. If a T-Rex had feathers, then all of a sudden, how could we say that the feather came from a bird? We can't because maybe the T-Rex had feathers.
True. Yeah. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this.
My pleasure. Thank you. All right. So any questions on that example? All right. So as we said, I was saying that I was going to do that example. We're going to take a break. We're at that hour-and-a-half mark. Okay. So we're going to pick up with this exercise when we come back. It's 3:48 on my clock. So we're going to go to about 3:53 or so, and we'll pick up then. All right. So see you guys in a few minutes. All right. So getting back into this, I'm going to lower all hands. We just did the trap here of going against the evidence. We got to keep going here. Same exercise. Who wants to volunteer for the next one? Olivia.
Hi there.
How you doing?
Good, thank you.
All right. So Brandon stole his cell phone, thus he's immoral. Which of the following assumptions must be true in order for the conclusion to be properly drawn? Anyone who does something illegal is immoral, or there's no way to be a moral person if you have stolen something?
I would say the second one, there's no way to be a moral person if you have stolen something, because although we can assume that stealing a cell phone is illegal, we don't necessarily know that.
So you're saying that stealing a cell phone versus illegal would be like a language jump kind of thing?
Yeah.
That you're not on target with each other?
Yeah.
Would you say that by LSAT common sense standards, we could assume that stealing is illegal? Like, is it common sense that stealing by definition is illegal?
Okay, yeah, I suppose yes.
Yeah, so that's not going to be the issue. It's going to maybe start highlighting a difference here, but the difference of why this is wrong is not just because those are not on target. You don't want to say to yourself, illegal is not on target with stealing. And so that difference makes them the reason it's wrong, because by common sense standards, I do think we can accept that stealing is something that is illegal.
Okay.
So if we accept that stealing is something that is illegal, which answer would you pick then?
I would say, so I think then maybe I would switch to the first one.
Okay, so what do you not like about the second one then? I want to be able to come up with reasons why the wrong ones are wrong. That's what this whole exercise is about. Each one of these, the wrong answer has something concrete and logical about it that makes it wrong.
Okay, so my thought with the second one is we only know about being immoral. And so my thought is, I'm not sure if we could say that you could be a moral person. I don't know if I'm off. I'm not sure.
Let me ask you this. What kind of question would this be? What are they looking for here conceptually in the question?
Something that must be true.
So are they asking for something that it's saying which of the following assumptions must be true? Like what kind of question, the question type? Have you been following the course and the different question types and everything?
I was only able to make it to the last one, so I haven't.
Okay. So we did kind of talk about it a bit in last lesson when we talked about flaws, but are you familiar with the difference between sufficient assumptions and necessary assumptions?
Yes.
Okay, so which kind of question is this? What are they looking for conceptually? A necessary assumption or a sufficient assumption?
A sufficient assumption.
Why would you say it's sufficient? Just curious.
To be honest, I don't know. It just felt right.
Yeah, so the question is the concept of a sufficient assumption, okay? Sufficient assumption is something that, if true, would prove the argument correct. So it's if we have this assumption, then the conclusion is properly drawn.
Okay.
A necessary assumption is something that is required, it depends upon, it must be true in order for the conclusion to be true.
Okay.
So which one is this?
A necessary assumption?
It is a necessary. Now, when people see properly drawn, they think sometimes that it's a sufficient assumption because that language is common in a sufficient assumption question. But a sufficient assumption would be an assumption that proves the argument correct. As opposed to this one is something that must be. It's actually technically saying it's necessary for the argument.
Okay.
That is going to make a difference. Okay. In why the right answer is right and the wrong answer is wrong. So if we analyze this first one, if anyone who does anything illegal is immoral, and Brandon stole, and we've said that stealing is something by common sense standard that's illegal, could we validly conclude then that he's immoral if this was a rule that we have to accept?
Yes.
Yes. Is this necessary for the argument? Now, the way we test it is by doing the negation test. What's the negation of this?
Nobody who does something illegal is immoral.
That's too strong. We don't go from a strong idea, strong positive to a strong negative. We go from strong to weak.
Okay.
Instead of saying anyone who does anything illegal, we'll say some people don't. Or some people aren't, I should say. So put it in your own words. What's the negation?
Okay, so some people who do something illegal aren't immoral?
Correct.
Okay.
So there are some people who do things that are illegal, but are not immoral. Would that weaken this argument?
Yes.
And this is where it's a very tempting trap, but it is a trap.
Okay.
Okay. And it does have to do with the difference between illegal and stealing, but not because they're totally not on target. Okay. What happens here is they're saying that there are some things illegal. The answer would create that some illegal actions don't lead to immorality, but that could be any illegal action, and it doesn't definitively refer to stealing. It's not, in another way of saying it, it's not necessary that every single thing that's illegal in the world is immoral. For this argument to hold true, we don't need every single illegal action in the entire world to be immoral. We just need to know that stealing is something that would be immoral.
Okay.
So this is a good example of something that would be sufficient, but not necessary. We refer to this as what I call an overkill answer. It's like all encompassing of a much broader idea. And that typically will be sufficient, but not necessary. So the trap here, when we were looking back at these traps, we saw the strengthening, weakening evidence. That was the one that we did just before the break. This one's going to be, I realize I'm kind of doing, I must have copied and pasted it over wrong. This is the too strong or weak example. Okay, so the answer is too strong or weak, or too broad. This is actually the too broad idea. So the idea is this is all illegal actions. We don't need it. It's not necessary that all illegal actions. Okay, so illegal is broader, encompassing of stealing, but it's not going to be necessary for this argument.
Okay. Makes sense.
Right. Thank you, Olivia. Any questions?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
All right. So anybody have any questions on this one? Valerie.
Hi, yeah, I do. So I'm trying to figure out, so are you trying to prove through these examples that the question type and what to look out for?
Well, no, yes and no. We're kind of recapping. We've already discussed all of these question types in past lessons. So all of these question types and what to look out for and how to mentally break down the issue here. So when we have this, Brandon stole the cell phone, this is more, I've been talking about this example since lesson 1. Lesson 2, and we discussed necessary assumptions. Lesson 3, we even got into flaws and we kind of built on that. I also have, besides the core lessons, a lot of videos, both free and paid, that really go into each question type, applying it to example after example. So here, we're not really trying to get into the necessary versus sufficient. What we're trying to do is understand the traps. That's what this exercise is about. There's 2 answers, very tempting. Okay, both of them in every one of these examples is going to be a tempting answer. They are things that I see students getting caught between all the time. And we are trying to figure out what are those logical things that come up that make a wrong answer wrong. Okay, so when we are between 2, we have to say, okay, which one do we like and which one don't we like? And when we have one that we don't like, what is our reason for why we don't like it? Do we have a logically sound reason that it's wrong? And in this case, the logically sound reason this one's wrong comes back to a concept we discussed earlier, which is that it would be not necessary. Even if it is sufficient, it's not necessary to this argument. It's too broad.
So the question that that you asked, right, in your question STEM, the first one is the answer for that, right? If I'm following.
No, this is the trap.
That's the trap?
Yes, because saying that it's illegal is not necessary. It doesn't have to be true that everything that's illegal is immoral. To say Brandon stole a cell phone, thus he's immoral, assumes that stealing is immoral. That doesn't mean we have to have every single illegal action ever in the history of anything illegal being immoral. It just means we need stealing to be immoral. And that's what this one does. If you have stolen, then there's no way to be moral, which no way to be moral would mean immoral.
Right. Okay.
All right.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you for your question. Any other questions from this example? Yolanda, how you doing?
Hi, Brandon. How are you?
Good.
Good.
What's going on? Yep.
So, it kind of refers back to one of the examples we did a little earlier, but it's still irrelevant to this. If the answer choice, I know you're saying it's an overkill, and I understand, but if it's an all-encompassing kind of answer choice and something, it kind of falls on, if the stem falls under that purview, should I say, then why wouldn't that work? Because I'm doing the same
This
thing.
would work as a sufficient assumption, but it would not work as a necessary assumption. It's not necessary that all illegal actions are immoral. It would be sufficient to proving the argument correct. If we accept that all illegal actions are immoral and Brandon stole a cell phone and we're inherently accepting that stealing is illegal, then it would prove he is immoral.
Okay, because the way I see this, I guess I just mischaracterized the question, because I see it as a sufficient assumption question as well, because in sufficient assumptions,
I did kind of trap you with the question stem too. This is a way that they have asked it in the past, but it's not actually asking for a sufficient assumption. A lot of people see assumption, properly drawn, sufficient assumption. But if you actually read the wording of this question, they are not asking for an assumption that would prove the argument. They're asking for an assumption that must be true for the argument.
Okay.
And that makes it a necessary assumption question.
I see. Okay.
Right. And I just see somebody in the chat kind of ask the question of, which I just happened to pull up the chat. I don't always have it up, but I saw somebody asking about this, what no way to be moral would mean that it could be amoral. Why would it have to be immoral? Here's what I'm going to ask. Yolanda, are you still there?
Oh, yeah, I am.
I'll take advantage of the fact that you're still on. What is the negation of this answer choice?
So the way hold on. So let me just write it out the way I would. So if stolen, then not moral. So the negation would be if moral, then not stolen. I'm sorry.
You're doing the contrapositive. The opposite, the negation, is not the contrapositive. Contrapositive is the opposite of the opposite. What I mean by that, contrapositive is saying the same thing in a different way. It's the opposite of the opposite. That's the reversing and negating. We're not asking for you to do the contrapositive. I'm asking you, what is the not true version of this here? So a necessary assumption is something that if we do the not true version of it, it should weaken the argument.
There is some way, there's some way to be a moral person if you have stolen something.
Yeah, it is kind of that. So the negation of an if then can get a little confusing. So I'll go into this here. I do it in the necessary assumption videos a lot, flaws as well. But just to kind of talk about it, you have to accept the if and negate the then. Okay. Now, when you accept the if, so it is possible for someone to steal something, and there is a way to be a moral person. So if we accept that you can steal and still be a moral person, does that weaken this argument?
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. So the fact that this would not be sufficient, because somebody was pointing out that there's no way to be a moral person doesn't mean definitively that he's immoral. Pointing that out would actually make this not sufficient, but it still is necessary. Because if it wasn't true, then you could be moral. That would be counter to Brandon being immoral.
Right.
So if we somehow flip this to a sufficient assumption, this one would be right. This second one would be the trap, because of that difference in the degree between moral. That not moral doesn't definitively mean immoral.
Got it.
I think it would be close depending on how they word it, but yeah, I'll leave it at that. All right. So thank you, Yolanda. All right. So who wants to, I'm going to lower all hands. Who wants to volunteer for the next one? Shannon, how you doing?
Hey, doing good. Good to be back.
So next one, long one.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So the common theory, I'll read it and then I'll give you a second to kind of process it. Common theory that dinosaurs such as T-Rex and Velociraptor had scaly skins that did not have feathers has recently come under attack. However, this attack is unwarranted. It is true that recently found fossilized feathers have been dated as originating from before the earliest known birds. It is still entirely possible that future findings will suggest that our current beliefs about birds are false. Which of the following, if true, would most weaken the argument?
Okay. So the conclusion is the attack on the common theory that the T-Rex and the Velociraptor had scaly skins is unwarranted. So the attack is unwarranted on that theory. And the argument is because so I have to break it down first. So while it is true, recently.
No, breaking it down is actually the trick to this one. I'll say that.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah, no, this one is meant to be like really dense in the stimulus, and it's trying to lose you there. Okay, they're trying to just lose you. Take that patience, have some patience, and just make sure, take it one phrase at a time, make sure you get it in your head. I'm going to tell you, when I was writing this one, I had to like 4 times in my head be like, am I even writing this right? Like, is this making sense to me? Because while I was even writing it, it was getting confusing. Okay, that is literally going to be the issue. If we actually I just want to even point something out. I don't know, did you read the answers just yet?
No, I haven't. I'm still just making sure I understand everything.
Before we even process, I want to point something out about these answer choices, okay? So the first one says the feathers were found next to fossilized footprints resembling a large dinosaur. Where the second one says feathers would have provided no evolutionary advantage to dinosaurs such as T-Rex and Velociraptors. Now, are they kind of saying the same thing, or are they almost like opposites of each other in terms of the suggestion of whether T-Rex and dinosaurs had feathers?
I would say that they're very different.
So the first one says that feathers were found next to fossilized footprints resembling a large dinosaur.
Yeah.
Would that say that would that point towards the dinosaurs having feathers or not having feathers?
No, he could have eaten a bird or something.
Well, remember, so strengthen and weaken are in what we call the subfamily of implications. They only have to point the needle towards what we want. They don't have to be reliant on strict logic. So don't worry about overlooked options of your answer. Just which way would this point the needle? Would this point the needle more towards it being a dinosaur or not being a dinosaur? Or like dinosaurs having feathers or not having feathers?
So I would say, I would point towards them having feathers.
If anything, let's even say this. Let me just even phrase it that way. If anything, would you say your debate in your head is kind of towards it, or is it nothing, right? Is kind of your thought. So I'm just asking this. If anything, if I told you it leans one way or the other, would you say towards them having feathers or away from them, like not having feathers? It would point towards them, I think you said earlier, having feathers, correct?
I would say yes. Well, because I think the argument I'm having in my head is the correlation and causation. If it's next to it, does it?
Oh, 100. What you're still doing is analyzing whether it does its mission logically validly, which I'm going to tell you in a weakened question, that's actually like what is the issue in strength and weaken you want to ignore. Okay?
Oh, okay.
Weaken, as long as it would move the needle, we're back to that real world likelihood.
Okay.
So does it point the needle more towards them having feathers or not having feathers? And when I'm saying the needle, I'm not talking about logic. I'm talking about probability.
I would say yes.
So it adds to probability, even if it's not definitively proving, but it would add to the probability that they have feathers, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, what about the second one? Feathers would have provided no evolutionary advantage to dinosaurs such as T-Rex and Velociraptor.
So if we negate this one, it would
Don't
be
even worry about negating.
Okay.
As it stated, would it point
as it stated? Okay.
Having feathers or not having feathers? If anything, don't worry about like a trap of it doing nothing. I'm telling you.
I would say if it goes away, it goes away from.
Right? This is me getting into the heart of what I'm talking about here. Okay. These two answers, while they have, I intentionally phrase them in ways to make you do exactly what you're doing. You're not clearly, definitively, like validly, logically pointing to those options. They are just kind of moving the needle towards one option or the other. But I want you to recognize that if you even just read these two, they're pointing in opposite directions.
Yeah, that's a good point.
One is a strengthen and one is a weaken. I'm not telling you which one's strengthen or weaken, though. That's going to be back to the skill.
Right. Okay, so
what they're even, and this is where there's like, I had to read it 4 times. I don't even remember. Honestly, I have to like go through it again in my head right now, because I'm going to point out it's a common theory that they did not have skins, but that's coming under it. I mean, that they had scaly skins that didn't have feathers, which is come under attack, but that attack is unwarranted. And then we want to weaken it. So it's like, I call it like a ping pong effect. They're like shooting your brain, like which way are you supposed to even do, right?
Yeah.
That trap is so common on these strength and weaken questions. Every single strengthen question will have a weaken answer. Every single weaken question will have a strengthen answer. Okay. So let's try and break this down then. Which way do we even want to go? Do we want to suggest that they had feathers or they didn't have feathers?
We want to suggest that they did have feathers.
You
because
positive? You positive?
I think
So break it
so
down to me.
because
Break it
the
down.
attack is on the theory that they didn't have feathers. It shouldn't have, that attack shouldn't be happening. So we want to prove that they did have feathers, or we want to go in that direction.
So yeah, and this like ping pong effect, what I start doing is this. I start taking two negatives and canceling themselves out, okay? So there's theory that is coming under attack, but they're saying the attack's unwarranted. So those two almost cancel each other out, right?
Right, yeah.
Attack being unwarranted, it's like, okay, so we're just back to mentally in the position of the theory. And the theory then, so the author's position is that they did not have feathers. And then we want to weaken it. So then we want to argue that they did have feathers.
Yes. So then we could probably pick A.
It would be A. Now, what I will tell you, and this is where I wanted to just add back in and what you were discussing. Both of these would work as like this one would weaken and this one would work as a strengthen. The fact that I'm bringing up like language and issues that aren't directly on point with it definitively being a dinosaur feather or not is irrelevant. Strength and weaken are about the needle pointing. So as long as it would point in one direction versus the other, that's all we really care about.
That's really helpful because I think when I do my review, I think I struggle with what is most relevant. And so I think that even pointing out that the answer choices themselves were in completely different directions, that really helped me to think through, okay, now I can make sure that I'm staying on target mentally with what is supposed to be the focus.
Exactly.
Of the question.
Exactly. I can say this example because it's from one of the like free tests that I have the license to talk about free, but there's an example in one of the June 2007 questions that says that the recent claim that the Tasmanian tiger are not extinct is false. So are they even trying to argue that they're alive or dead?
No.
The recent claim that the Tasmanian tiger is not extinct is false. I'll bring up that like blank sheet.
Okay.
Recent claim that Tasmanian
So it is extinct.
Tiger is extinct is false. Is not extinct. Sorry, is not extinct. Is not extinct.
Okay.
Is not. The recent claim that the Tasmanian tiger is not extinct is false. Is not. I forgot to type the word not. Extinct is false. It's like, that's a question.
It is extinct.
You can't read this and just like naturally walk away going, oh yeah, extinct, like a lot, like dead. Like you have to take that extra second of mental patience and be like, okay, wait a minute, not false, cancel, extinct, that means not alive. Okay, now let's keep reading.
Gotcha.
Right? You have to do that on these questions. That's what they're doing here. This ping-ponging back and forth. They did not have feathers, has come under attack. So they did have feathers, but that's unwarranted. So they didn't have feathers. And then they want you to weaken it, which gets you back the other way.
Yeah, honestly, I think this is kind of fun when we kind of like, it's fun to figure it out to me. And so I think that the ping ponging, just kind of trying to keep track. I think if I can make it fun in that way.
I'm so glad you said it, because I don't know if you've ever been over to LSAT Wizard, but that was like my quip that I always like to say about the test, right? So I don't know if you've been on LSATwizard.com, but I have this thing here that the LSAT is fun, said nobody. Until, you do this. And I'm so glad you said it, because you're proving it right. That's literally what I like to say about this test. It's a puzzle test. Okay. It's something that when you start to unlock the puzzles, you start to see the issues. It can be fun. So it really doesn't have to be this like dread of, oh my God, it's like so stressful, like this test, it's studying. It's really just puzzles. Like I always say, people do Sudoku for fun. People don't do Sudoku because it was like assigned for a class. Like
right.
Is Sudoku the most fun thing in the entire world ever? No. And I'm not going to say LSAT's the most fun thing in the world ever, but it can be something that is fun in that puzzle solving nature. Okay. Yeah. And that's what I want to point out about these traps that we're doing here, is even when you're like totally stuck, I clicked on the wrong thing. Even when you're totally stuck between different answers that seem so like close or whatever, there is a very concrete logical solution as to why the wrong one's wrong. Right? I don't think I've had a single one of these examples that I called on someone and they're like, oh, definitely that because of this. And they saw it right away. Every single one, I was able to like stump the student. And how is that possible that I can write these questions that stump the students? Because I know the issues that come up. right? That people overlook. And that's what this lesson's all about. The concept of the day is learning to see these different traps. Okay, so this was actually the one of going the opposite direction, strengthening a weaken or weakening a strengthen. Okay?
Awesome. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you, Shannon. All right, Valerie, did you have a question on this? I saw you raise your hand while we were doing it.
Yes, I was completely stuck on, if you could go back to the example that you gave about not the one you wrote off on the side.
This one? Oh, the one that I wrote off on the side?
Right. You said
This
that
one?
that was, yeah, you said recent claim that Tasmanian tiger is not extinct is false. And then you said not extinct, not alive.
So what I was doing was I was taking two negatives and canceling themselves out. So in my mind, I'm like, let me get rid of that not and the false because two negatives cancel each other out. So they're saying they are extinct is what the author's trying to say, which means that they're not alive.
Okay.
And this is actually from one of the questions there. I actually did the explanation video already for this one. So you can find it on my YouTube channel where I go into it. But yeah, that's like language you just got to take slow is kind of my point of what I'm reinforcing here. You can't just read, speed read. Like you have to take your time while reading. Okay. One of my biggest mantras as we're getting closer to the end of this concept, we're going to be switching over to like what to be working on to get your self-test ready. But the idea is with timing, don't rush, but don't debate. So ultimately you don't want to rush while reading at all, because if you miss the issue like this one, you'll totally be on the wrong side of an answer and then you're totally off base. So you got to make sure you understand it. But at the same time, we don't want to sit there debating. If you're between two and you're not seeing the trap, hopefully by this lesson, you're going to train yourself to start seeing the trap better. But if you're still just looking at those two and like, I really can't see a logical difference, cut the debating out, just pick one and move on.
Yep.
All right.
Yes, sir.
Oh, thank you for that question. All right. So what I'm going to do, we did that one. So I want to keep moving here. So anyone want to volunteer for the next one? Emma, how you doing? You there, Emma?
Hello.
Hey, Emma, how you doing? Going once, twice. Can you hear me? All right, we're going to call on someone else. Special Thompson. How you doing?
Okay.
Look, Daddy.
You got the
Daddy.
Hello? Oh, is this?
It's Ian.
Oh, it's my son Ian. That's
He
so
wanted
funny.
to say hi and be a part of the class.
Oh, my son wanted to say hi. Hi, Ian. How you doing?
Hi, I wanted to show you something a bit.
You want to show me something? Well, I'll have to look at it later when I'm done teaching.
Okay.
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 Bye.
All right. Bye. Love you.
Love you.
All right. Bye. Thank you. That was funny. All right. So with that, I'm going to keep moving here. Who else wants to volunteer? Sandy.
Hello.
How you doing, Sandy?
Good. How's Ian?
What's that?
How's Ian?
Ian's good, I guess. And
We
I saw
all love
it's
Ian.
so funny that he's going to be 5 in March. So he's coming up fast. So anyway, getting back into this, Sandy, doing this example here. Environmentalists, I propose doing X to lower the effects of global warming. Critics say that doing X involves materials that will contribute to global warming. Nonetheless, I believe doing X will accomplish our goal. Which of the following would most support the environmentalist belief? I'll read the answers and then give you a second to read it and think about it. The negative effects of the materials for doing X are offset by the gains of actually doing X. And the next one, a large company believes that they have discovered ways of doing X without using the materials mentioned by the critics.
I want to go with the first one, just because that was the first thought that came to me when I was reading the stimulus.
Oop, and I
That
just
I
clicked,
need-
hold on one second. I clicked on the wrong Zoom tool there.
Okay.
I lost. And it's funny, I just clicked on when I'm trying to get my tools back. Someone said that something about Cocomelon, which my kids would go nuts for if they heard that. That seems to be what everybody's kid is into these days, but I lost where the participant list went. Oh, here it is. Okay, I got it. Sorry about that. A little distracting with those Zoom tools clicking on it. All right, so so your thought was this first one. So let me ask you this: why would the second one be wrong then?
I think because it says a large company believes, it doesn't mean that the large company knows. It's not strong enough.
So not strong enough. So I'm going to tell you this. This is back to what I was talking about. I think it was Shannon in the last question. I can't remember. I apologize. But the idea of strengthen and weaken only have to point the needle even just a little bit. There's never, ever a reason in a strengthen or weaken that an answer would strengthen, just not strong enough.
But
Okay?
this is most support question would also be a strengthen or weaken?
Yes, this is a strengthen.
Okay.
Okay. So this would be a strengthen. And as long as it would move the needle at all towards the conclusion, then it would strengthen. So what would be and I told you with this, what I've been saying throughout this is that every one of these wrong answers is wrong for a very particular reason. There is something logical about one of these answers that makes it wrong. If I was to tell you, I'm not saying it definitively is, but if I was to tell you that the first answer is wrong, what would you say your best reasoning could be?
I'm not sure.
All right, so it's a tough one. This is a tough one. I'm going to give somebody else a chance. So Sandy, I'm just going to see if we can get somebody else on. Okay. Anybody else want to take a chance at this one? It's a tough one. Ariana?
Hi there, how are you?
Good, how are you doing? So what are you thinking? Which of these answers would you choose?
I would choose the second one.
Why would the first one be wrong in your mind?
So for the first one, it goes back to you saying how it makes it neutral since the negative effects are offset by the gains.
So offset by the gains, would that point to an overall lowering the effects of global warming, or would that just mean like a neutral?
It would just mean neutral, like they're equal, basically.
Yeah. So that's actually the issue here. The negative effects being offset, the language offset would mean a neutral. It would, if it was like minus 100 on one end, then it would be plus 100 on that end. If it said something like they are more than offset, now that would be a correct answer. But when you're saying just that it offsets, we have to realize that it only gets us back to neutral. All right. Thank you, Ariana. Sandy, I'm going to call on you. Does that make sense?
Yes, now it does.
Okay, perfect. So it's just sometimes as subtle as that. So I'm going to mute everybody. And do we have questions on, I'm not mute everybody. I meant lower all hands. Does anybody have a question on this one? Anthony.
No, I'm sorry. I don't. My computer's black.
Gotcha. Okay, no problem. Gonna mute you there. Adaku? Oh, I may have clicked on the wrong person. Did I click on you? Maybe not. Let me do it one more time.
Hi.
Question.
Yes. So is B wrong? Because
no, B is the strengthen. This is the correct answer.
Okay. I mean, wait, B.
This one's the trap.
Oh, okay. So is B right? Because because it implies that the environmentalists will do X. Like
exactly. He opens the door towards a way of doing X without worrying about this whole negative. So it's actually taking away the entirety of the negative. Does it definitively take away the entirety of the entirety of this Like materials, no, because as somebody pointed out, it just says they believe they've discovered, which would lead to us not saying for sure that it exists, but it still points the needle towards an avenue in which we could totally get rid of the materials as a worry.
Right.
And so that's why it's not trap and neutrality. It may seem weaker because they believe in it, but remember that strengthen and weaken only have to open the door towards the suggestion of something that would move the needle. And so this B, or the second answer, would open that door towards a way in which we could totally get rid of X, as opposed to A is saying something more concrete. We would definitively be able to, but the only thing we'd be definitively able to do is offset, but it wouldn't end up actually pointing towards lowering effects. You'd just get us back to neutral.
Okay, so my thing with B was I automatically saw a large company and I thought, what does that have to do with like the environmentalists? Because I was like, just because like that is an option doesn't, like, how do we know that the environment?
Remember that strengthen and weaken are about adding new information that would have influence on the argument. Right? We're not trying to derive an inference. We can't conclude anything about a large company. So if they were having a question that wanted you to reach a conclusion and they bring up a large company and you're like, we never talked about large companies, that's a right analysis. But remember, these arguments are these types of questions are questions where the answer has an impact on the stimulus. Okay. So the answers are going to be bringing in new information that should have some sort of impact on the argument. Okay. So large company is what we call a source, but the question is, what are they telling us? And they're telling us about it, that they believe they've discovered a way of doing X without using material. So it suggests that avenue in which we could strengthen the environmentalist argument.
Okay, that makes sense. So anytime we see offset, like in A, that means it's neutral, basically. That means the argument is
exactly. Now, and I'm saying that, like, when you said anytime, I always like hesitate because I have to give like the caveats. Of course, there's probably ways I'm not thinking of beyond the one I also said of like it more than offsets. So it's like, obviously any given question, you got to analyze it in its role, but generally speaking, offset would be like a neutral. It neutralizes.
That makes sense. Okay, thank you so much.
My pleasure. All right, I think we have one more question from this one and then we'll move on. So Parveen.
Hi, so my question is, in reality on the exam, will the options be a little bit more stronger? So I know that we have to move the needle.
Not always. Not always. So here's what I'm going to say. On quote unquote easier questions, strengthen and weaken will be more concrete. I actually think strengthen and weaken can be some of the most challenging questions on the entire test because of the allowance of how they could be so like wishy-washy in like this, like a large company believes that this happens. Like sometimes I fall for it. Like when I get questions wrong, I'd say half the questions I get wrong are strengthen and weaken.
Yeah, and that was my challenge with this one, is the company believes that, but it's so, for me, that's so weak.
The question is, would it still move the needle towards your conclusion?
Yeah, like 1%.
And that's the thought.
Yeah.
Is it, well, that's what I'm trying to highlight here too.
Yeah.
And kind of making this more than just about the traps. It's also kind of reviewing some of those other concepts we talked about. So yeah, strengthen, weaken has that issue of implication-based questions. They could be suggestive-based answers. So as long as it moves the needle even a little bit, then it would satisfy. The problem with this first one is it doesn't, it's more concrete, as I was saying, but it doesn't move the needle towards helping the conclusion. It concretely moves the needle back to neutral.
Okay, that's helpful.
All right. Thanks, Parveen. So with that, we're going to move on. Who wants to take a stab? I think I got two more here. So who wants to try the next one? TJ, how you doing? Did I click on TJ? Keeps jumping around on me, these tools. Where'd your hand go, TJ? Oh, he had it up, and I think, I'm assuming TJ, they had it up. TJ. There you go. I think I clicked on you now. No? Not working? I think you have it on mute, TJ. It's showing me that you have it on mute. Now I see you off mute. Can you hear me? I hear like white noise coming, so I'm gonna have to put you back on mute and call on someone else. I apologize. All right, so I'm gonna call on someone else here. Abdullah. You there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, absolutely. What's going on?
I'm doing good. So
this next one.
New study that shows.
All right. Yep. So I'll let you read. I'm going to
Yeah.
read it out loud for everybody. New study shows, you know what? I'm just going to let you guys all read. I realize reading it out loud probably is more distracting to everyone. So just try and read it, get an answer, and let me know your reasoning.
Yeah, I'd have to go with the argument presumes without providing warrants that people who go to the beach at least one time per week spend more time in the sun than those
So you're
who
going with
do
that
not.
second answer choice. Why would the first one be wrong?
Okay. So I just think that like I just thought the second answer was better. And
this is
I honestly
I'm going to pause you for 1 second because I'm going to say this for everyone. Obviously, on day of the test, if you're like between two, you kind of have to rely a little bit on your instinct, right? We don't have time to like sit there and analyze every single answer every single time. And so you might end up having to pick an answer that you're not truly loving the process of elimination. Like you really like this answer, but you can't say for sure why the other one's wrong. That's going to happen. That's kind of what this whole exercise is, two tempting answers. You might just gut like one more than the other, but the reality is there is a logical reason why every wrong answer is wrong. So what is the reason that you're saying that the wrong one would be wrong?
So I would say that, okay, so the reason why the first answer is wrong is because it just doesn't show you know, it said, like, I honestly thought the first answer was right because, like,
So let me ask it this way. So what is the first answer suggesting? That there's that there's the fallacy, right? Of which fallacy?
That it's inferring.
That it's inferring, well, it's inferring what fallacy? I don't know, did you participate in the last lesson, lesson 3?
No, I didn't.
Okay, so there's this fallacy that we call confusing correlation with cause.
Yeah.
Right? Correlation cause. Was this argument switching between correlation and cause?
Yeah, it was actually.
And we talked about earlier with somebody else, I'm going to put it on this like blank sheet over here, that there's that statistical correlation statement where people who have X are more likely to have Y than people who do not have X. And we got to start seeing this language. They use it multiple times every LSAT, that this is mere correlation. I saw someone in the chat say the evidence suggests cause. That's not correct. This is not suggesting cause. This is just correlation. You're comfortable with that, Abdullah?
Yep.
All right. Was this evidence the same thing, that people who have X are more likely to have Y?
Yes, I would agree with that.
Let me actually do it this way. If I scroll down here this way, then I can get this. So this statement is that evidence, right? People who have X are more likely to have Y. Studies show that people who go to the beach at least one time per week develop skin cancer at rates much higher than those who do not. Okay. So are they then switching to cause? Is this conclusion based in cause? Spending time in the sun causes cancer?
Yes.
Yeah.
Wait.
So this is correlation cause, right?
Yeah.
So then is A the right answer then?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So then what's wrong with B?
I think that the reason why B is wrong is because it doesn't provide enough, it doesn't describe the actual flaw. It just says that the argument assumes.
So presumes that you weren't in the last lesson. So I'm going to give away, I talked about in flaw questions, presumes without providing warrant, that suggests a necessary assumption. So is this a necessary assumption? How do we test a necessary assumption? Are you familiar with the test of the negation test, the not true test?
The argument presumes without providing.
Are you familiar with the necessary assumption question type?
No, I would not.
Okay, so there's definitely stuff I'm going to move past because it was stuff from previous lessons. So I'm just going to kind of point out here. I'm going to call on someone else. Thanks, Abdullah, for the time. Let me lower hands. Someone else want to take a stab. And by the way, I see people going, thanks for clarifying. I did not say yet which way. I'm not saying. I'm just still going back and forth in this. We don't know the answer. Who wants to kind of jump in at this point? Anthony. Your computer again, or this time you ready to participate?
I am ready. Can you hear me?
Yes. So what do you have as an answer?
So since you didn't say it, I believe the second one is the flaw. And the first one, to me, because they named the incorrect fallacy, it's why it's not correct.
So you're saying that this stimulus is not a correlation cause?
Yes.
I was breaking down that this first sentence is correlation, and this second sentence is cause. It says causes right there.
Okay.
So there is a correlation cause.
So it jumps from going to the beach being in the sun as being in the sun because you could
Okay,
be
so
under.
now that's back to a language. And I remember calling on you earlier that was something that dealt with a language jump, right? The one I called on you at the beginning of the lesson?
Yes.
Was a language jump. We need to be able to catch those jumps. So what this one's actually doing, I'm going to kind of start giving it away here, is what I like to call it's where there's multiple mistakes is what they're doing here. But they love this on the LSAT. They do this all the time. Okay, A is correlated with B, thus alpha is causing B. And there's like this jump between A and alpha. So they are doing correlation cause. I'm not telling you they're not. They are doing correlation cause. But here's what I'm going to ask you now. Are they saying that solely on the basis that two phenomenon are correlated, that one is causing the other between the two phenomenon that were correlated?
No.
No, why not?
I'm sorry you jumped in front. They're not saying that because they're saying the first correlation is correct, but the second correlation, they jumped from A to C.
In a way, it's like I call it like A and alpha, right? So the issue here, to explain for everybody, this answer is a trap. This is not correct, okay? There is a correlation cause jump going on, but it's not a correlation between two phenomenon where one is causing the other. They're getting into a different causal aspect. It's like this one, A is correlated with B, therefore alpha is causing B. That's not saying A is causing B, they're saying alpha is causing B. And because we're jumping between going to the beach at least one time per week with spending time in the sun, that is not one causing the other. They actually do this all the time on this test, on the LSAT. Okay?
So, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, yeah.
For the one that's the first one, how would they have been able to word that to make it correct? Sorry to go there.
So if it says like, it presumes without warrant, because then it's making it a necessary as opposed to validly inferring. So if I said it presumes without warrant that correlation is indicative of cause in general, so it doesn't like use that language of like one correlation
more generic with the language.
Like if they did something more general, then it is a necessary portion of this argument that there's some sort of ability to go from correlation to cause.
Okay.
So if they did it they could word it in a way that makes it right. And that's what makes that so hard. It's funny, I've been, while people are like thinking, I'm pulling up the chat more than I have in any other lesson. And I'm seeing a lot of people saying like, some of these are so hard. Like my point is to pull up the most challenging issues on this test right now, right? And seeing it on test day is very challenging. If you're like, oh my God, how am I going to catch this on test day? You want to know the answer? You're probably not every single time. Okay. It's why you're not going to get a 180. It's why not everybody gets a 180 every single time. Even students that do get 180s, like myself, can still get questions wrong. Okay. You can get questions wrong and still get a 180. The point is you're not seeing it every single time. Okay. I'm pulling up some challenging issues though, but showing that there's still concrete foundational logic that allows us to eliminate these trap answers. Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Brandon, and thank you for all your help.
I'm going to stick with you for one last thing. So, remember what we said. I remember you said that you were in all three lessons. The argument presumes without warrant that. What did we say that introduces?
Evidence.
Necessary assumptions.
Okay.
So presumes without providing warrant that would indicate that the rest of this answer is a necessary assumption. So we would actually do the negation test with what I have highlighted. So what would be the negation of this?
The argument doesn't presume
No,
without
you
warrant.
negate just the highlight. We
I'm
don't.
sorry, it lags on my highlight and on my side on the highlight.
Gotcha. So just start at the word people and then negate. Like people who go to the beach.
People who do not go to the beach at least one time per week.
So we wouldn't negate the subject matter, we negate the characteristic.
Do not people who go to the beach at least one time per week and do not spend more time in the sun.
Exactly. So if people who go to the beach at least one time per week do not spend more time in the sun than those who do not, would that weaken the argument that spending time in the sun is causing cancer based on this correlation between going to the beach at least one time per week and skin cancer rates? If going to the beach at least one time per week, those people do not spend more time in the sun than others, would that weaken this argument?
Yes.
Yeah, because it's highlighting that jump. It's tearing apart that jump. Okay, so this issue is what I call where, so if I show it on this trap list here, okay, we already did the trap of neutrality. There's multiple mistakes in the stimulus in this one is the trap, and one preempts the other. That's actually the issue, that one of them is preempting the other. So because what they have is a trap answer relating to one of the mistakes, there is correlation cause, but this is a trap answer related to correlation cause. The correct answer goes a totally different direction related to the language jump, which was the second mistake. Okay. If I may. Oh, sorry. I'll click on you, unclick you. Anthony, you still had a question?
Yeah, just if I may, it seems like a lot of them, it does, like you said earlier, that language aspect breaks, helps you with a lot of them. Is there a reason or why, what's your trigger that lets you know to go from language to say negation or what else are you looking at?
Looking for language is in the stimulus. We need to be aware of that language. We said there are 4 pillars of logic you have to be keeping track of at all times. You can't just ignore any one of them. You can't say, I'm just looking for language or just conditionality or just degrees. You got to be balancing all 4. It's a challenge. It's what the skill of the test is testing on. Now, in the questions, this is where going into the question type review, and this is where if you go through the outlines, we have the different question types. Something that I'm going to be putting up, it should be available for those that are going to watch the recording. I just haven't finished it yet, so it's not part of this outline. I'm going to be posting to LSATwizard.com a cheat sheet of the different question types and how different question types you're looking for different things. Now, you don't need the cheat sheet. If you want the cheat sheet, just go pull out all 4 outlines and kind of summarize just the logical reasoning question type portion of it. That's what I'm going to be doing. But the idea is this is a flaw question. When you have a flaw question, we have different style answers. You have to know those different answers. This is what we spent time doing. I have an hour something long video in addition to week 3's, in addition to lesson 3 of the core concepts. I have an hour long free video and hours long of extra videos on flaws. And so you just got to make sure you understand when you see this language presumes without providing warrant that's one of those like memorization things about the question type that triggers a necessary assumption, which means we're going to have to negate the rest of that answer choice. So that's just one of those, this is where there's so many different parts of LSAT, concepts, question types, memorization, and application of skill. It's kind of all of this. All right.
Again, I thank you very much.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks for participating. All right. So with that, we're going to keep moving. I have 2 more. I realized I thought that I had 1 more. I got 2 more here. And then I want to make sure we go through others. So lowering everybody's hands. Who wants to participate in this next one? I see hands raised, but I don't. Oh, it's everybody up here. All right. Elizabeth, how you doing?
Good.
All right. You ready for this next one? I'll let you read it instead of reading it out loud. I think that's a little easier for everybody.
The first one? Or no, hold on. B.
Why? And I don't know why. I don't really care. Notice with this whole trap lesson, I don't really care why B is right. I want to know why A is wrong.
Because Brandon is taller than Melissa, but it doesn't mean that he is tall in general.
So the logical difference between absolute and relative, is that a meaningful logical discrepancy in this answer affecting this argument?
Because tall people are generally good at basketball, but we don't know how tall exactly he is.
And that's exactly the issue. It's that absolute relative issue. This is what we call an absolute answer. Okay. Tall people generally being good. Okay. Tall people generally being good is not the same as taller being better. They have nothing to do with each other. This is a comparative issue. Brandon taller than Melissa is comparative. Conclusion is comparative. The jump is that taller is better. Comparative issues. An answer that says tall people is good would be irrelevant. Okay. Even if we just are like, but doesn't it move the needle? No, it doesn't move the needle. Tall being good does not affect the needle even a little bit related to taller being better.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because they're tall being good just means that there's some sort of threshold. We may not know what tall is. Like, is it 6 feet, 6'2", 6'3"? We don't know. But there is a threshold that once you pass it, you're in this good. We don't know if 6'3" is better than 7 feet. We can't compare those.
Yeah.
All right. So relative language needs relative support. And since this answer is not, is on the absolute level, we would not be able to pick that at all. This would not work. This is correct. Was there any hesitation with the answer B? Like the, I guess the question is, right? Like the average professional basketball player, what does that have to do with Brandon and Melissa?
Yeah, that's where I was hesitant, but then I thought about.
And what is the average person? We don't know what the average person is, right?
Yeah. But then I thought about how tall, like the first one.
And that's, so
doesn't correlate with the stimulus.
It's creating a relative issue, which is what we wanted, of a certain group of people being taller than other people. Can we agree that's what it's saying, right? The actual language is saying that they're taller. Can we then take that as, can we take from LSAT common sense standards there being an implication that a professional basketball player is better at basketball than the average person?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's kind of where this answer does tie being better with being taller. Now, it's not about Brandon and Melissa, it's about other people, but answers about other people would still support this argument. Remember, support, strengthen, just needs to move the needle to be a little bit more likely.
Right.
And so talking about other people, not a problem. Talking about tall being good in reference to an argument that's talking about taller and better, that is a huge logical issue.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So this is that trap of absolute and relative. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
I realized there was one thing that I think I didn't copy. There's going to be 2 more examples. And I already see this here that I didn't copy it over because I was trying to copy all my answers over. So I'm going to copy this one over because we got 2 more. I realize now that there are 2 more. So I'm going to copy that language, add it to this exercise so that we do have 2 more now. All right. We'll clean up that formatting in a second there. We'll do this one after. All right. So next one is this one in between here. So we're actually going to do that one. Who wants to volunteer for that one, for this next one? Gonna call on someone new. Victoria.
Hello.
How you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm good. So you ready for this one?
Yes.
All right, I want you to read it on your own. Our town this year has experienced example. And when you get an answer, let me know.
Okay. I think it's B because A is comparing different areas and B is comparing the same areas. if that makes sense. I know I'm not wording it well.
No, that was a perfect explanation. I refer to this as the logical concepts of internal relative versus external relative. When we talk about the word taller, okay, if I said Ian got taller over the last year, that would mean that he by himself has grown. That's different than saying Ian is taller than his sister.
Right.
That is an external, comparing two different subject matters. Internal and external relative have nothing to do with each other, just like absolute and relative have nothing to do with each other. So this stimulus was about which one, internal or external?
Internal.
Internal. Our town is getting more rainfall, so we expect stronger crops.
Right.
Where this first one is saying areas with more rainfall versus other areas tend to have better crops than areas without that rainfall. That is an external, not relevant to the argument of an internal jump.
Yeah.
All right. So that was a perfect explanation, Victoria. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any questions on that example? All right, good. I actually think that one's a more challenging one, and you guys all got it, which is great. So let's move on. One last one. So I'm going to lower all hands. One last example. Who wants to volunteer? Somebody new. Joel.
Hello.
How you doing, Joel?
Good. How are you?
Good. So last one. I want you to read it.
Let's see.
I don't know why the formatting got all weird here with this, but
I think it depends on the second assumption.
So the second one. I hate Microsoft Word with these stupid formatting issues. I don't know what's going on here. All right. So what's your reason why the first one would be wrong?
So stress is not mentioned.
So somebody else mentioned that kind of explanation earlier. They were like, but that didn't, like, it was the example with the large companies. Do you remember what I said about that?
No.
So when someone was like, oh, this one doesn't mention large companies, I was saying, well, are we trying to draw an inference here? Are we trying to add new information that has impact on the argument? And in the strength and in this one, it was adding information that has impact on the argument. So finding out new information, if the large company has some sort of characteristic that would influence the argument, then it would be relevant. So let me ask this. What are we doing in this question? What kind of question is this?
It's a necessary assumption.
Necessary assumption. Yeah. So what do we do in a necessary assumption?
Negate.
Negate? Did you negate?
No.
All right. Well, if you're picking an answer in a necessary assumption without negating, you got a problem.
Right.
Negate answer choice A for me.
Stress can both lead people to eat chocolate and contribute to acne breakouts.
Would that weaken this argument?
Yes.
Why?
Because eating chocolate, it's kind of like the third.
It's exactly what it is. It's that predictable overlooked option we talked about with correlation cause, where those underlying third explanations could easily be the thing. This is actually a real world truth. A lot of people have heard chocolate causes acne, sweets cause acne. The reality is there's really not anything in chocolate that does cause acne. It's actually this, stress, the real world explanation. When people are stressed, they go eat chocolate, and stress eat and sweets, and stress causes acne. So people have this correlation in their head of chocolate and acne, but the chocolate is not causing it, it's the stress. So why would this one be wrong then? What's the negation?
There are some other causes of acne besides for eating chocolate.
Say that one more time, sorry.
There are some other causes of acne besides eating chocolate.
If there are some other causes of acne besides for eating chocolate, would that weaken a conclusion that chocolate is contributing to acne breakouts?
Yes.
And this is where it seems like it, right? Let me actually ask you though, and I'm going to highlight certain language when I phrase this negation. There are some other causes of acne besides for eating chocolate. If I say besides for eating chocolate, would that mean that chocolate's not causing acne, or that it is and there's just other ones as well?
Sorry, I'm not understanding the exact structure of the second option.
If I just said to you that
Or
if I write it out this way, let's change it to a weaken question, okay? And I'm gonna, because that's what a negation test is. Would
Right.
it weaken? And I'm gonna just now type it out as a weaken, okay? There are other causes of acne besides for eating chocolate. Would this weaken the argument?
No.
Why?
Because
when we say beside it, there are other causes besides for eating chocolate. Would that language still, would that include chocolate being a cause? Or is that excluding? Is it saying there's other causes at the exclusion of chocolate?
It includes them.
It explicitly includes it. So it's not actually bringing up an overlooked option, while it's bringing up other causes, but in a way that's including the option that the conclusion is concluding.
Mm-hmm.
If that may, I know I use the same word like 3 times in the sentence, but does that make sense, Joel?
Yes.
So when you negate this answer, it still includes chocolate as a cause. That would make it a trap answer.
Okay.
All right. Any questions on that one?
Nope.
All right. Thank you, Joel. Any questions on any of these trap examples? Pamela.
Yes, hi. Thank you. I had a question. So are you saying that if it had said there are other causes of acne besides eating chocolate, it's because of 4 that's in there, right? That it includes it?
If I take out 4, no, I think it still would include the possibility. And we have an established correlation here. When you have an established correlation, you actually need to give, this is something that we talked about in the flaws lesson with correlation cause, that you can't just, when you have an established statistical correlation, you cannot just name other causes. You need to actually give another explanation that for the correlation itself. Because if we said in this example, okay, you're reading this, studies show that acne breakouts happen 3 times more often on days after eating chocolate than on days that do not. Thus, eating chocolate must be contributing to acne. And I tell you that not showering for a month straight would cause acne. Would that weaken this argument? And the answer is no, because you can't tie it back to the correlation that we had. We have a correlation to chocolate. Unless somehow you could tie people not showering with eating chocolate, you can't actually, you're not actually providing an alternative explanation.
Okay.
All right. It's a very tricky issue. This whole lesson today has been a very tricky issue. That's the whole point. It's those ones that we get stuck between, finding these little nuances as to why the right one's right and that wrong one is definitively wrong. All right.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pamela. All right. I'm going to lower all hands. Any other questions so far? All right. So to go over what is still to come, because this is the end of this concept lesson, but we're still going to do a couple things. So first, remember, there are still question types that I haven't covered yet in terms of the curriculum. What I've been doing is separating the question type explanations into new videos. So check out the YouTube channel, check out LSATwizard.com, go to free content. I've been doing free video explanations of each question type, doing these free examples from the June 2007 test. So you can go check out those videos. When you're done with this, there's also a little write-up on reading, which is an extension of what we've been talking about in how to start getting into time sections. So you could read that outline and talk about what to do with that. Now, besides that, I have homework that's an extension of lesson 4. Okay, so we have just lesson 4's homework, just stuff built on that to show you guys what there is. Okay, we have certain questions from other tests. Notice test 52, 53, 54. I've been going from those. This question type drilling. These questions, okay, I will be doing explanation videos of, but because these are not part of the free ones, in order to access them, you do need to sign up for one of the LSAT Wizard paid subscriptions. So if you are looking for more explanations to these or any other question type, including the reading, we will have it. Now, we do have more explanation videos on that paid portion. Now, in addition, when we go to these full sections, one of the things we're going to talk about in a second is certain drills. We've already mentioned in lesson 3, this cover-up drill. I'll go into it again in this lesson. But I want you to do cover-up drill for these 2 sections. It's PT 65, section 3, PT 65, section 4. Now, as a reminder, my sections come from the Prep Plus version, the Law Hub website. Okay, so the Law Hub website has different order of sections than other websites. If you're using a different resource besides the Law Hub website, you have to reference the Law Hub website to figure out which section it is. Okay, in particular, section 3 is going to be the second logical reasoning, where section 4 is going to be the reading comprehension. Now, when it comes to this homework, due to certain marketing things that I've been able to do, I will be doing a free video explanation of the entirety of this second section of logical reasoning from 65. It'll be a nice recap, putting all of the issues into action. Okay, so look out for that video. In addition, with test 65, section 4, the reading, about half of the section I'm allowed to do with free explanations. The other half I'm going to have to do as part of the paid. This just has to do with the marketing rights and licensing rights that we have. So with that, stay tuned for more of those. But with that, what I want to get into now, post-course studying. What should you be doing now that you have the foundation, especially after you finish all this homework? So my big idea is, at the end of the day, I am first and foremost an individualized tutor, because I recognize the value of individual prep, that every single person is individual and has strengths, weaknesses, different timelines, different timing, different issues on this test. You really want to figure out what your issues are and start addressing them. But if I am to give some generality, okay, it's all typed out here for you in the outline, but I'll go through the main big points. First and foremost, you want to balance what we call drilling with practice tests. Okay, no matter which format, what drilling is certain exercises that you should be doing, whether it's individual sections, certain string of questions, other drills I'm going to talk about that are actually typed out on the next couple pages, these different drills that I'm going to emphasize for you guys. But the idea is it's not how you would do a test. It's not just taking a practice test. So you can't just do practice test, practice test, practice test. You got to mix in some drilling. In fact, most of the work is going to be some way sort of drilling. But the biggest thing is review. You have to go over questions. You have to be able to look at the right and wrong answers and go, okay, it's right because of this and it's wrong because of that. And I really want to emphasize to you guys that you should try and do it for yourself as much as possible. There are resources like my homework explanations. I'm going to keep adding more section explanations. There are resources out there, a lot of different people that have various explanations out there. Seeking out help for explanations is a crutch. You want to be able to explain it as much as possible to yourself. When you're having trouble, that's when you could seek out some of those additional explanations, but you really honestly don't even need that. You really just want to focus on the ones that you know yourself. So reviewing is going to be key. I'm going to be talking about a drill in a minute that is actually a combination of a drill and a way to review that to me is the single most important drill you could do in terms of process for getting yourself better. Okay, this is going to be one of the biggest things we could talk about. Before we get there though, I'm just going to talk about timing because that's like the biggest concern so many people bring up to me is timing, timing, timing. So my general thing is I have students that are people watching this video, people in this lesson right now that are all over the place. I know because I've talked to them. We have people that are 6 months out, a year out. We have people that are taking the test literally within a week. So obviously everybody's a little different in terms of those areas that they're at in reference to the test. Now, I am doing this video as part of a structured curriculum, so I'm just going to talk about it from all levels here, okay? What do we do when we're done? When you start building in timing, my general thought is you should not be worried about timing at all while you're building skills. It's why I haven't talked about it until the end of the last core lesson, okay? I want you just working on fundamentals. As you get closer to the test, or if you just feel like you're ready to start assessing, my huge thing is what I call doing timed up sections. Timed up sections should be happening all the time. Timed up is the idea of setting a stopwatch and seeing what your comfortable pace is. Okay, if you're doing it on the Law Hub website, which allows you to do practice mode, the practice mode will have a timer. So say you go 35, fine, the time ran out. But now you start your own clock and see how much over you are. I don't care if you go over while you're doing time sections. The question is, how much over are you going when you're going comfortable? So timed up sections are all about moving at a comfortable pace. As you progress with timed up, once you start incorporating timed up, the idea is to just understand your general timing and just try to be a little better every day. Even if it's just a few seconds better, that's fine. Naturally, you will start getting better with timing by doing these timed up sections time after time after time. Okay. Now, as you get closer to the test, of course, we need to incorporate timing of strict timing. When it comes to that, I'm actually going to skip this comment here for a second. Actually, no, I'll talk about it now because it'll make more sense. So as we get closer, as a general comment, we'll start worrying about timing. Later on, I'll talk about exactly how I think about that. But the idea is one other thing that is huge for my students in terms of timing and just test preparation. I want you to start incorporating what we call uncontrolled environments into your prep. So what I want you to do is not just be taking the test in your quiet desk in your room in the corner. Okay, I want you to go somewhere that is distracting. If you're living with people at home, go to the kitchen and tell them, hey, don't talk to me. I'm not act like I'm not here, but let them talk on the phone, cook some food, whatever it may be that they're doing, turning on the TV, all of those things. You want to be able to practice with those extreme distractions. If you have a score dip during that, fine, it's normal, it's to be expected, but you got to learn to counter that. Okay, you really need to learn to change it up too. Go somewhere else, go outside to a public park and just go somewhere. You know, pre-pandemic, I used to tell people, go to like that Whole Foods cafe or whatever cafe and just sit there with all the sights, sounds, smells going on where you can learn to zone out the world. The more if you were at home right now going, oh, I can't do that, I need it to be quiet, that you need to do it even more. Okay, the more you're saying to yourself, I can't do it, is the more you need to lean into that. It's something huge for test day to start preparing for the element that's inevitable that everybody has when you have that, oh, shoot, it's test day moment on test day. And you have these distractions and you just become hypersensitive to everything around you. So you need to make sure that you can really practice with those uncontrolled environments. Now, in terms of starting to incorporate it, a general structure that I like to follow, everybody's different. About anytime you're more than 6 weeks from the test, at most, you should just be doing timed up, if not even totally untimed. Okay, so 6 or more weeks, don't even worry about it. At about the 6 week mark, you want to start looking at what your timed up are. If you're in the 4 to 6 week mark, so more than a month, but inside 6 weeks, and your timing's within 10 to 15 minutes of whatever the correct pace is, then just keep doing it for 2 more weeks. Okay, just try and shave it down a little bit at a time, a little bit at a time, a little bit at a time. If you're more than 15 minutes over, you need to start doing timing drills, which to me, the cover-up drill that, again, I've already mentioned, I'm going to go into it a little bit more in a minute. You do the cover-up drill because the cover-up's, to me, one of the best drills to get your timing down, okay? 1 time per week during this, no matter what though, 4 to 6 week mark, even if you're 10, 15 minutes over, at least 1 time per week, you should be adding full-time tests, okay? Just at least 1 time per week, you sit down, you do a full test in that day, and you really stick to that commitment. Okay, it's not the only thing you do. It's just notice in this 4 to 6 weeks, we're just doing 1 time per week. As we get to the final 4 weeks, we start really ramping it up with the time. What I say is 1/3 of your work should still be untimed or timed up. Okay, untimed or timed up. I'm okay with totally untimed too. I think there's no reason not to time up just because why not? But if you're like breaking a section up, fine. I'm okay with untimed for 1/3 of your work. The other 1/3 is on the other extreme. It's doing those uncontrolled environments we were talking about where you're really strict with timing. And then the last 1/3 is your final practice test. So about 1/3 of the work you do are the strict practice tests, 1/3 of the work in uncontrolled environments, and 1/3 of the work focus on accuracy. Now, when I say 1/3 of the work, it's 1/3 of the amount of questions you do. But here's the thing, review is king. So review ends up being off the clock. We're going to talk about a way to review. The confident review is what I call it. This huge, huge, huge drill we're going to talk about that I want, it's a way of reviewing. I used to get practice tests where I was scoring 177, 178, and I'd spend almost as much time reviewing as I was actually doing the test, which should say something. I really only had a few questions that I was unsure about, but I still was spending that much time reviewing it. Okay, you really want to make sure that you're not selling yourself short and focusing on getting questions done, getting practice tests done at the expense of review. Never go to the next thing until you've had a chance to thoroughly review that test. Okay, so that's my general point about timing. Now, before I take questions on that, what I'm going to do is talk about some drills. The number one drill I've been mentioning here, okay? I haven't brought it up in this course, but I brought it up in other things in the AMA if you watch that, or if you're one of my students, I bring it up earlier. The idea is this confident drill. The confident drill is, or confident review, I call it, I switch names, confident drill, confident review. It is the most important thing you can do in your prep. Okay, it's a spin. If you're somebody that's familiar with the concept of what we call blind reviewing, it's a spin on that. You don't have to know blind reviewing to make sense of it, but it's the distinction between what this is and blind review is super important. This is actually what I used and only this. I never had answer explanations, didn't have online resources that were out there. It was totally different when I studied there. I just studied on my own. I was reading a lot of different books on different logical concepts, LSAT concepts, etc. But when I was reviewing a test, I had to do it myself. And I did this. This is what I've always used to help me for preparation of any exam. So what is this confident drill, confident review? The idea is that anytime you go through a section, you do it 3 times. Okay, 3 times. The first time is your first attempt. It actually doesn't matter what format you do it. You could do it timed, untimed, cover up. This is where you could actually do the confident drill with other drills. You could do the confident review with your practice test. You should be, not just can, you should be doing this confident review with your practice test. You should be doing the confident review with the uncontrolled environments. You should be doing the confident review with your time, untimed sections. Everything you do should have a confident review. The first attempt is however you're trying it, whichever which way. What you're doing though, while you're doing that first attempt, is flag questions you're 100% confident on. Now, it's a little bit different than what most people instinctively think. When you have the actual Law Hub format, so this Law Hub format here, this is the actual format of actual LSATs. If you haven't checked it out, lawhub.lsac.org, this is the format you're going to take it, whether you're doing it in person on a tablet, or if you're doing the Flex version, which is that pandemic at home version. When you have this, there's a flag button here. Okay. The flag button most people use as the ones they're unsure of. That to me is a mistake when it comes to logic. Okay. The reality is logic is based in 100% ability to understand what you're seeing. With all of those trap issues, when you saw the right logic, the light bulb should go off and you should know you're 1,000% right. So what I want is for you to flag the ones you're 100% wrong, 100% confident you got right. If you are a little hesitant, you don't flag it. If you totally are lost, great, you definitely don't flag it. But there's no distinction there. I don't care about the ones that you're most confused on. I see people doing the blind review concept where they focus on the ones they're most confused on, going over those. I don't care about those, okay? The reality is that even 175 scores and higher will have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 questions per section that they are totally lost on and are kind of just shooting from the hip, guessing 50-50. If those students are having trouble and you're at a 150 level, why are you even focusing on those questions? That should not be your worry. And even if you're like, but I want a 175, you don't get from 150 to 175 by focusing on the 175 level questions, and not, especially not the ones that even the 175 students are having trouble on. You should be focusing on the ones that are right at your level right now. If you're scoring 150 on your practice test, that's because your skill in logic, in LSAT logic, is at a 150. Okay. And you need to get to a 152, 153, 154 before you can get to 170, even if that's your goal. You can get there. Again, I went from 153 to 180. So it is possible to do it, but I didn't go from 153 to 175 like that. Okay. It happened over time. It took a long time. And what I do is I focus on the ones that are right at your level. When you see the logic, you should be 100% sure you're right. Okay. And that's what I want to start emphasizing with that first attempt. Now, the second time around, so the key is, sorry, after you do that first one, you don't grade. Okay, you don't grade it when you're done. So you're flagging every question, but then you don't grade it. You just kind of back out of it. Okay, on the Law Hub, as long as you're doing it in practice mode, which is what you should be doing, then you can just kind of back out. Even if you do it in test mode, what you can do is you can, I guess it's hard. I don't think you can actually if you grade it in test mode. So just use the practice test mode. And even when just be strict with when the timer runs out that you stop. So when the timer runs out and it hits 0, just back out. Notice I can still go in here. I can look at my questions. I can review, and then you can back out. Okay, just make sure you're strict with yourself with the timing when you're doing strict sections. So the key is after that first one, you don't grade it. For the second one, you do what we call the target review. What you're going to have is what we call a target number. Start with a target of 7. And the idea is that you pull out the 7 most confident questions you have. Okay. If you get all 7 correct, you passed the target review. It's a pass fail. The target review is pass fail. Either you pass the target review, and so for the next section you do, the target review should go up by 1 and you go up to 8. If you get any amount wrong, you lower the target by 1. So you have this moving target. If you're doing it correct, your target review will be different section after section. When I talk to students, one of the first questions I always ask them is, what's your target number? Okay, where are you at? Are you at 7? Are you at 10? Are you at 15? Did you go down to 3? Some people have to. I actually have a student right now taking the test in a week. He's been working with me for about 3 months. We were looking back at it just yesterday, which is why it's fresh in my mind. He started at 7. He went down to 6, 5, 4, 3. He literally was down to 3. Then he passed 3, was up to 4, failed again, was down to 3, was up to 4, down to 3. For like a few weeks he was there. Then he started building back up slowly. And it's not just pass. Section after section, it's a slow grind. And after 3 months, he's now in the double digits of confident, and that will directly push your score higher. This confident review is how you push from any level to a higher level. You're at 150, you want 155, do the confident review. This is actually where I get a lot of students who are like, I'm plateauing in the 170s. Confident drill. You're having a discrepancy between your first attempt and your blind review. Confident review. Switch the mindset. Don't focus on the ones you're most unsure of. Focus on the ones you're most sure of. Prove to yourself that when you're seeing a logical issue, you can trust what you're seeing. That is so the key to this test, that you can see the logic and trust that you can trust yourself. Okay. Have confidence in your confidence. That's what this is all about. Okay. So you can have that review number that goes up or down 1. Now, with the target review, just to clarify, if your target is 7 and you only flagged 3 on the first time around, you got to find 4 more. You're pushing yourself. You're always pushing yourself. Let's say you overconfident, you flag 15 of them. Well, you got to pick out 7 out of those 15. The idea of this first attempt is I literally don't care how many you flag. You could flag 1, 2, 10, 25. I don't care. It's starting to create a separation in your mind of the ones you were more confident and less confident on. But the target review is really where this review happens. Okay. It's my spin on the blind review that's so important to improvement. Okay. Now, once you're done with that, still super important, grade and thoroughly review. Now, how do we thoroughly review? One of the biggest mistakes students do is only review the ones they get wrong. Or I hear very common, I review the ones I get wrong plus the ones I'm most confused on. As I said, that is a huge pitfall. If you're only focused on the ones you're most confused on, well, the reality is I'm still confused on them. Okay. You're not going to understand those by spending time on that. What I actually emphasize, I want you to review every question you didn't pull out during your target review. If you weren't 100% right on it, then you have something to learn. And you will actually learn faster by focusing on the ones that you were 90% sure you're right and probably were 90% accurate and probably got right, but just had some sliver of hesitation. And if you focus on reviewing those, go over that wrong answer and just reassure yourself that that wrong answer is wrong. You will start to push your score faster, higher and faster than if you're just focused on the most challenging and only the ones you get wrong. So huge pitfall to only focus on the ones you get wrong. Focus on every question you were not 100% and really try to explain why the wrong one's wrong. It's human nature to look at a question you got right and go, well, I knew that. Yeah, I knew that. But that's so a pitfall, because if you were 100% and you were like, yeah, I knew that, then you would have flagged it and pulled it out during your target review. So if you didn't pull it out, then there's something for you to learn. That is the key to this confident drill, confident review. Okay, so the confident review, that's what I need all of you doing at all times for logical reasoning and reading. You should actually have this. You don't need to do this for games. Some people do. My theory is you should be confident on all games question, but you can do this on the games if you wanted. But the idea is you should have different target numbers. The only thing I realize it's not on here on the outline is that you should have different target numbers for each section. So you'll have, let's say you pass LR, that doesn't mean you go up on reading. So you might have one target number for LR, different target number for reading, a different target number for games. That's where the confident drill works, is each section has its own target number that's constantly going up or down just by 1. And I clarify, it only goes up or down by 1. You miss, you get 5 out of 11, you still just go down by 1, okay? So the key is, this also is much more indicative of your ability. I literally during the break saw, I have a text message from a student freaking out. He's got the test in a week and a half. He just had a test that he did really bad. He actually had two tests in a row. He didn't do as well. He did on the lower end of his range. Okay. The reality is there is a level of variance of this test that you can't predict. Okay. If you flip a coin 20 times, you're not going to get 10 heads, 10 tails. There's just an element that of randomness, that variance is going to show. And if you get 13 heads. That doesn't mean you got good at flipping heads. It just means that it was random and you got 13. Meanwhile, the next set of 20, you get 7 heads. That doesn't mean you got worse at flipping a coin heads. You just had to deal with that element of randomness. And so if you're looking at any one test, any one section going, oh, this section, I did better than the last one, or I did worse, so I'm now worse. You're focused on the wrong issues. The confident target number is much more indicative of your ability. If you're confident, if you can consistently get 7 out of 7, then you get 8 out of 8, then you get 9 out of 9, 10 out of 10, you could keep proving to yourself that you're 100% confident on those questions. You are seeing the logic of this test. Okay. The students that I have in the 170s are all in the 15 and higher of the confident. I don't have students getting 170 that are lower than 15. That's just the reality. And meanwhile, I don't have students that are higher than 15 that aren't scoring 3-4 wrong at most on LR, okay, if not even better. And that confident review is something that is so key to every level. All right, so I can't emphasize that one enough. Now, to change it up as well, to challenge yourself, there's this confident drill that we've talked about. So I'm not going to spend too long on it because we did talk about it in other lessons and it's written up again here. The idea is we introduced it to reading, but it's also something that you can incorporate to LR. You do a section where you read the passage, you read the stimulus, and then you literally cover it up. You could take a piece of paper, tape it to your computer screen, cover up the stimulus. So if we're reading here, we're doing a question of LR here. Okay, what I'm going to do is literally, I'll use this Microsoft Word. When I'm reading, I go like this. You allow yourself to see the question stem, but as soon as you want to see the answers, you have to move it and cover up the stimulus. So now you get to look at it, okay, and you try and answer it. Now, when you are, what's going to happen inevitably is there's going to be questions like I have to uncover, I have to look back. You're allowed to uncover, but when you uncover, you have to recover the answer choices. Now, you're only allowed to uncover 8 times, okay? Oh, I realized it's this. The 8 times. So you're allowed to uncover 8 times and you never get the opportunity to see the answer choice side by side with the passage stimulus. Should always be having one of them covered up. You can see the question stem at all times, so I'm okay with that, but you can't have the side-by-side comparison. So you got to trust your reading skills, trains you to focus on those issues more thoroughly while you're reading. Okay, now, when you get to a full-time section, remember, you're not, even when you're not doing this drill, you should be thinking about this drill and reading the same way. Okay, something I'm going to emphasize at the end here that's not written. For everyone, if you are rushing, you've already lost. The second you speed up, you've lost. You cannot rush. Where you cut down on time is 2 ways. There are 2 ways to be better at time. One, just be better. Just be more skilled. When you see the issue, you're going to jump to the right answer. Those are your fastest questions. So the better you are, you're naturally going to get faster. Second, cut the debating. Realize when it's not clicking, you're down between 2 and you just can't see the logical issue. Don't spend 2 minutes reading the answers back and forth, back and forth. People say to me, is there like a certain time limit I should have? Is there a certain number of reads I should do? The answer is no, because everybody's different. Me, I'm confident on like 20 plus questions and I can fly through questions if I need to. So when I'm stumped, I'll read. I do have questions I'll spend 3, 4, 5 minutes on, but that's because I can make up for it elsewhere. If I was at all in a time crunch, I wouldn't spend that much time on it. Okay. You have to realize that any one question is not the make or break on this test. Okay. If you were already unsure, at best, you're probably 50-50. So even if you were to randomly guess from there, how much accuracy are you really losing? It's never going to be the make or break. Meanwhile, if you spend too long on a question, let's say in a reading, you end up costing yourself the time on the whole passage, or you're rushing in the passage. Now you can miss a string of 5, 6, 7 questions in a row because you're rushing. So you can never rush. Okay. Never rush, but cut the debating. In terms of general strategy of questions, I know people have asked me, when it comes to LR and reading, your strategy should not be to just focus on the early ones and get them right and then guess on the rest. That should not be your strategy. Okay. You cannot say to yourself, I'm going to do 3 passages on reading. That cannot benefit you. I promise you. Start learning to pace yourself to the 4th passage. Start trying to push yourself in a way that's what I just said. Don't rush, but don't debate. The cover-up drill will help you. If you're over in time and or you're more skilled, start cutting the number of uncovers from 8 to 7 to 6. Keep getting down. If you're spending too much, if you are still going over with the cover-up and you've even cut it down to 6 uncovers or 5 uncovers and you're still going over, you're spending too much time debating. I promise you, you're not taking too long to read. A lot of people say, I just take too long to read. I promise you that's not the case. Okay. I'm one of the slowest readers out there. I spend an average of 3.5 minutes per passage reading. Okay. If you think about that, when you actually go pace yourself, 3.5 minutes average. That's what I'm doing. Okay. But I just see an answer. I know it. I see an answer. I know it. I finish reading in 30, 31 minutes because when I see the answer, I'm able to jump on it. And if I'm not sure, if I'm in a time crunch, I'll just pick one and move on and wave the white flag, or I'll spend some time doing it, but finding that balance. So that's going to be my big suggestion towards building time over time. But again, if you are somebody that's more than 6 weeks away from the test, don't even be worrying about this yet. Bookmark in your mind, I got to come back to this when I'm 6 weeks from the test. Okay. Just focus on skills. As I said, the best way to be better at time is just to be better. Okay. And so work on those skills. The confident drill, confident review, that's what's going to make you better as well. So that's it for this course, for this core curriculum. That's the end of our last core curriculum. Again, a lot of homework to come, both free and paid. So stay tuned for that. Let me know if you guys have any questions. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up for some Q&A at the end of this. But if you are somebody in a time crunch, you feel free to leave. But hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Hopefully you guys now love and see the fun of this test. Hopefully you feel like you've improved. And so, yeah, thank you all for the kind messages and be in touch. So with that, I'm going to open it up to questions if anybody has any questions. Maria, I know you were having the mic issue before.
Yes,
How you doing?
I'm good. I was on the train, so that's what happened.
No problem. Thanks for joining us. So what's going on?
Yeah, so I actually have a few questions for you.
Sure.
So the first one, I find myself to be a person that sometimes struggles to focus in on reading passages, especially if I find them to be uninteresting. So I wanted to know, I heard you saying like, don't worry about rushing through it. Do you find it to be okay if you spend a little bit more time reading and then that will give you kind of like that confidence that when it's time to go answer the questions, you have like a full
Yep, exactly. Yeah, 100%. You have as best of a understanding as possible. And then when you're in the answers, you either say, okay, I know it, or you don't. And then you're 50-50. And if you're somebody that's running short on time, then you just guess on the 50-50 and that's it. Or, you're totally lost, fine, you move on. Okay. But your overall score, I've been teaching a long time. I've taught a lot of students. And I will tell you that as a huge, huge, huge generality with very, very, very minimal exceptions, spending more time reading is always going to work out better for you.
Okay.
Now, if you want to you said finding it interesting or uninteresting, a couple things to that. First, it's such a pitfall to tell yourself in advance, I don't like this topic. Okay. When people, I'm going to kind of prove something here to you guys. When people have the right motivation for something, we can find ourselves interested in it, even if it's something that we're not interested in the subject matter. Okay. Everybody at some point in their lives has had a crush on that person, where if that person was interested in it, your interest level just went way up. Is that fair?
Right.
Yeah. And it's like, I know my wife, which she was even making fun. We got our 6th anniversary coming up in a week. And we were kind of talking about, some of the things. And it's like, she used to go to a lot of basketball games with me, watch a lot of sports with me, not really happening so much anymore. Right. And it's like, there's always those things that when you have that ulterior motive, you can find yourself interested. So what's our ulterior motive here? It's the idea of a good score. Don't read it for a science passage. Read it for a puzzle that you need to unlock for a good score on the LSAT that's going to unlock a good opportunity to get into law school.
Okay.
Right? It's funny how so many people even will ask me, like, do you remember the passage on this? And it's like, honestly, I really don't, because I don't read it for like knowledge. I'm not looking at this as like general knowledge. I'm looking at this as a puzzle, short-term memory. Just take the words in, process it, look for that memory, short-term memory issue in the answers, and then you pick it and move on.
Okay.
All right.
Great.
You said you had another question?
Yeah, I was just concerned about losing that time. I find that that's where I most of the time lose the time because I'm actively reading, but that way I can make sure that I make that up by just not second guessing myself and keep going.
Exactly. Don't rush, but don't debate. That's always
Right.
the second you speed up reading, you've lost.
Okay. All right. Another question was, I know that you said that we have the lesson 4 homework, which we have with each lesson, but are you going to have like a spreadsheet of just like some additional practice that we can do? Like, because I'm taking the February test, and I know like once I'm done all the lessons homework, I may just be
Yeah.
like
So
something.
I would do these drills sticking to more recent tests. So if we are looking at just the test by number, the most recent as of this video recording is the Mayflex. And then on the numbering scale, it's the test 89. I generally like the 30 most recent tests to recommend to students. So that's any test numbered 60 and higher. Just jumping around between those. And I say jumping around because I actually don't like to just go 60, 61, 62, 63. I'll tell people go do 61, 71, 81, 62, 72, 82. That way you're not getting too accustomed to the writing style, because there is an element of just the practicality of the LSAT test writers, like having jobs and then there's turnover and people leave and then they come back, and writing styles are a real thing. So there is an element that if you're reading a test from the 80s, it will have a little bit writing style difference than maybe the test from the 60s. So I want you jumping around as much as possible, but stick to the more recent ones.
Okay. So
All
that's
right. Doing these drills, just jumping between sections. That's doing confident review, this idea of cover up drill, and that really being what you just keep working on, individual sections. If you are weak in an area, you absolutely can drill it more. You're having trouble with reading, do a reading day where I'm just going to do 3 sections of reading today. Maybe I'll do 1 7-step, which is that drill we talked about earlier, 1 cover up, and then 1 time section. And that's something I recommend to a lot of my one-on-one students. When I see they're having trouble with reading, I recommend to them doing that reading day of 1 7-step, 1 cover up, and a time section in that day. So, this is where I realize things are personalized. And so I'm not going to give like, do this test, that test, that test, just generally bounce around between the 60s and to 89.
Okay, and like search for the ones that we find personally to be
Doing
hard.
a little bit more on the sections you're having more trouble on.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But make sure in any given week, this is what we were talking about of like this final stretch here. Once you're in that final month, make sure at least a third's untimed, a third of your work is the uncontrolled, and then a third of your work should be practice tests at least once a week, if not more.
Okay. All right.
All
And then
right.
I just have one more question.
Yes.
Just about that was the one that I was trying to ask on the train that it broke up. But it was number 2. And when we first started, like in the beginning, and it was the problem I was having was about average. Yes, that.
Yep.
I find that a lot of the LSAT problems will or logic reasoning problems will have like that average word. And so how would you say that that would be like a semi-strong
No, I think it's not a degree word at all. I think it's like more like a language of a subject matter or this is a characteristic here. It's healthier on average. It's like meaning it's throughout for the last few decades. Like, so the subject matters here are group Y and group X. Those are the topics of what we're talking about. And the characteristic is for the last few decades, they were healthier on average, meaning like the average of the last few decades. Like, it's not such a clear cut thing. It's an abstract word that you don't want to overanalyze and over attribute meaning to. Remember, it's like tall. Like, what is tall? Like, tall is something that we may not have the same explanation of, but if they say tall, then that's it.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. All right. Thank you, Maria. So anyone else with questions? Lindsay.
Hi.
Hey, Lindsay, how you doing?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Good. So what's going on?
So I just have a question. It may seem like a really trivial question, but since I'm doing the LSAT Flex next weekend, I just thought I'd ask it. Do you have any tips for how to like mark up the reading comprehension passages? Because obviously in the books, like when you're writing it on piece of paper, you can mark it up easily with highlighter.
So first thing, I personally am not a fan of marking up reading while you're doing the drill. Remember that I like the 7-step drill, which is the marking up that you do as part of your like fundamentals. But once you're actually on test day, and it's actually part of what I talk about in lesson 4's outline too, on test day, I just want you to read it and answer it. Okay. If you're reliant on taking notes, you're already distracting yourself from just the best ability to just read. Okay. Now, if you are talking about notes, I mean, the highlighting on the Law Hub, I don't know if you practice with it. It's not the easiest.
No.
You won't love it, which is back to why I also think learning without it. And if you are, I guess, taking notes, like demanding that of yourself that you are, you just use your scratch paper, but you know, you only get 5 sheets and you need it for games. So, you know, I guess I come back to your best method's going to be not writing it up. Don't focus. I see too many people, even when it was paper pencil, when I see someone reading and circling this and underlining that and highlighting this and circling that, it's like, or drawing arrows this way. Like, I think that's just something that is distracting from your general ability to read. And I say this not just myself, not just even my students, something that I'm on Reddit, I'm on Facebook groups. I'll say this, okay? Ask actual 170 plus scorers what they do on reading, and 9 out of 10 will tell you what I just told you. They read it and they answer the questions, and that's it. Not 10 out of 10, but 9 out of 10 will, okay? And that should tell you that the best way to attack it is trusting your instincts, okay? So it is something that, you know, to get to that level, you work on that 7-step drill. Something I actually talk about in this outline is if you had trouble on a passage afterwards, then go take notes on it. So that way afterwards, you're getting better at taking notes. But in the moment of a practice test, in the moment of a time section, don't try to rely on highlighting or the practice test. All right. I see in the chat, someone posted a thing that says the LSAT Flex has the ability to highlight. Yes, the Flex and the actual in-person one, the Law Hub, it has the highlight function, but it's not easy to highlight it. There's such finicky things with it to answer that question. So I don't find it the most user-friendly experience.
No, not at all.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Lindsay. So I see a couple more questions. Yolanda.
So this is in reference
Oh, I can't hear you again. I think that's same issue as before.
Can't hear me now?
Yeah, much better.
Okay, cool. Okay, so quick question about one of the examples from before.
Yeah.
You know what number it is, but it's the one where it's talking about, it was the one where you said it was a necessary assumption question.
I had a bunch in here, but
the immoral, there you go, that one.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Oh, cool. So when I initially saw this question, I took it, and I know what you said earlier, but I took it as a sufficient assumption question, and then I took B, put it into the stimulus and see if that worked, and it worked for me. And I think in your explanation, you were saying that like if we took it
may
as
not be. Yes. So
Yeah.
just to explain, so if you were to take this as sufficient, which is not, but let's say they did word it as sufficient, and you plug this in. The issue was, and I said it gets a little gray here, and so I'm not sure they would do this. They probably would be clearer with it. But what the necessary condition of the resulting condition of this answer would be is that there's no way to be moral. Would that validly mean that you're immoral? And as somebody pointed out in the chat, there is the idea of amoral, like the neutral on the moral scale. Are you following?
No, I follow. It's just that
So
again,
if Brandon stole, he can't be moral, but would that prove that he's immoral?
Like per se.
And that's the question of the amoral is what comes into the question here. If you accept that no way to be moral, like moral and immoral are binary and everybody is either moral or immoral, then yes, it would prove it at a sufficient level. But if you accept that there's an in-between of like amoral, the in-between neutral, then this answer would not be sufficient.
I'll say. Okay. Okay. I just wanted to clarify. Thanks.
Yep. Thank you. All right. Emma, question.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, so I just had a quick clarifying question about the target review.
Yes.
So during the target review, are you going back, let's say I did the practice test and I flagged 10 questions as being 100% confident. Am I going back to those 10 questions and like doing them again and then pulling out the one?
Blind, are you familiar with the idea of blind reviewing?
Kind of.
It's just the idea of looking over a question that you've already done and you already have it answered, but you don't have it graded.
Okay.
So you're reviewing without knowing whether you're right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of you're going through the questions just being like, okay, say you flag 10, am I truly 100%? And like go over it one more time. And if you truly are, then you pull it out. You'll have a target going into that section based on, you know, whatever your moving target is.
Mm-hmm.
And so if your moving target is 7 and you flag 10, you got to find out of those 10, the 7 you're most confident on out of those 10.
Okay. And then you're reviewing the other 20.
And then you grade it. And then, yeah, you check your accuracy in the target review, okay, to make sure you're 7 out of 7.
Mm-hmm.
And then you review thoroughly every question you didn't pull out as part of your 7.
Okay. Okay. Understood.
All right. Yeah, I realize it's not like the simplest explanation of things, but once you get into the flow of it, it's not that confusing. And it's just so valuable, every part of this, that I didn't want to like cut any of it out to like simplify the explanation. So if you have any questions, you or anyone else about the target review, or confident review in general, just send me a message and I'm happy to explain.
Okay. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. All right. Last question, Olivia.
Hi there. First of all, thanks for the lesson. I think I've learned a lot. I just have a question about parallel flaw questions. So these ones I'm terrible at. And what I try to do is diagram out like the flaw. And then usually I look at the answer choices and I can narrow it down to like 3. And then I try to diagram those out. But I find that this
I'm going to interrupt because here's the thing. One, I'm actually going to be doing the explanation videos on that. And I haven't even discussed it in any of the lessons yet. It's one of the question types from chapter 4 that I have a write-up on. But then the second thing I'm going to say is flawed parallel is a trap to try and diagram. Okay, we're going to talk about that in the video. So if you still have questions, feel free to like reach out to me based on the video I end up doing on flawed parallel. But we're going to have both the free examples. How many are there? There may only be one. Let me go back to it here. So flawed parallel, I got 2 flawed parallels. So I'm going to be doing a whole explanation video on flawed parallel. It's here in the outline. I'm going to be doing an explanation of those 2. Then there's going to be homework videos that I'm going to do, which are these extra 4 questions as well. Okay. So yeah, if you still have questions from that, then definitely reach out and let me know.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. All right. So with that, thank you everybody who participated. Thank you again to Ave Maria, and I hope everybody reaches out and gives them a thank you, because none of this really would have been possible. I really mean that. They have helped put this all together in every which way. So thank you to them. Hopefully you guys feel like you've got stuff to work on, right? I'm not saying you're ready for test day. I'm saying that now's the time where we can at least say that we have learned everything we need to learn, plus those videos to come with those free ones. And you just got to keep grinding. All right. Any score improvement is possible. I've proven that. I've had countless students prove that 20, 30 points are possible. So thank you everybody again. Work hard. Reach out to me if you have any questions. And hopefully I'll speak to all you guys soon. Best of luck with your studies. Bye.